Let me introduce you to one of the proud supporters of From the Hawkeye of the Storm, Iowa floor covering down in Bondurant. Now, for the last year and a half, you've heard me talk about this great company in the heart of central Iowa. They've got their tough core, click together, 4.5 millimeter waterproof vinyl flooring, great for you DIYers out there. But even if you're just a contractor or you need a different type of flooring, they've got you covered, whether it be tile showers, carpet. Give Iowa Floor Covering a chance to serve you better and serve your flooring needs. Visit them online at iowafloorcovering.com. That's iowafloorcovering.com, or you can give them a call at 515-379-7000. That's 515-379-7000. Thank you to Iowa Floor Covering in Bondurant. Appreciate Iowa Floor Covering being a part of this show. You see their logo up in the corner of the screen. Tyler, Brian, Ryan, those guys down in Bondurant. They love them some Hawkeyes, and they love helping customers across the state with whatever project you've got on your hands, perhaps a DIY project, and they even do tile showers. So great options available. Just give them a call down there at Iowa Floor Covering, or certainly check them out at iowafloorcovering.com. Well, we have a very special show this evening. We have got a couple hours of programming here for you folks, and the first hour is going to be myself and a good friend from over at Rivals from our Hawkeye Beacon, part of the Rivals Network, and that is none other than Mr. Eliot Clough, who's having technical problems.
Hey, Corey. Sorry, man. I used to use StreamYard for a podcast I hosted myself, and now it's decided not to work all of a sudden. I didn't charge my phone either. So hopefully we last a little while. I wasn't expecting that. So we should be fine. But
you abandoned StreamYard, so it abandoned you, apparently.
Clearly. Zoom is on my side, but StreamYard has left the building. So, yeah, thanks for having me on, man. Sorry about the issues.
You're good. If you end up having to bow out at some point, no worries at all. This show, I love doing these live shows throughout the week. I haven't done as many this year so far throughout the middle of the week, but this is a fairly regular thing throughout Big Ten Conference play because it seems like you hit midweek, and I know a lot of people listen to Kirk Ferentz's Wednesday show. I think it's a great thing that Iowa has long done, and you get to hear from Gary Dolphin along with Kirk, but be able to kind of have people vent their own concerns, and especially after hearing from Kirk at the press conference, there's not a lot to talk about as it relates to depth chart, but this is such a big game schedule-wise, and I'm sure we're going to talk about the layout of the schedule. People have heard me kind of give my take on why I believe where this game is situated on the schedule is so instrumental to Iowa's chances of accomplishing its goals. But this is also a very, Vegas has got this as a very close, tight game. I think last check it was at 2.5. Iowa by 2.5 on the road. Of course, give Minnesota a few points. So on a neutral field, okay, Iowa less than a touchdown favorite. I think Iowa's got a chance of winning this game big, but I said the same thing about that Iowa State game. Eliot, how you feeling here about 3 days out from the game?
Yeah, Corey, I'm in the same boat as you. I'm really not impressed with Minnesota's quarterback. That's the first thing that stands out. And obviously Minnesota's had their offensive struggles. Darius Taylor's their guy, right? And I'm sure we're going to talk about him. But to me, this is this is going to be a serious indication as to what this Iowa team is, right? 2-2 is very different than 3-1 at this point in time. Just like 3-0 would have been very different than 2-1 at this point in time. And you lose a game to a mediocre Minnesota team. They're middle of the pack in the Big Ten at best, right? There's talent on that team. I'm not trying to disparage them to the degree to say that they're the worst team in the Big Ten or anything like that, right? But this is going to be telling. I'm assuming it's going to be close. That's how this game tends to go. But if you're Iowa, what can't happen is you can't start slow like you did against Troy, right? Kirk Ferentz said it himself. He's not a pregame guy, but he said he felt like they came out flat in warmups, and they did in that game against Troy as well. So you can't have that happen. You can't make these mistakes that they've made in these last 2 weeks in terms of allowing big plays. You have to come out fast, strong, punch them in the mouth, and set the tone early. And this is very clearly a very different team than it was last year. They have a pulse offensively, right? Didn't have that last year with Deacon Hill under center. And so I don't know. To answer your question, I don't exactly know how I feel. I think this game is going to be. I think it's going to be telling for the rest of the season. I think that's the best way to talk about it. Oh, lost you. I can't hear you.
It's my bad. Let me start over. I think there's going to be some people that think that I'm overreacting with this statement, but I think with the 12-team playoff and the way the schedule shapes up this year, this is a must-win game if there ever was one. They lose this game, let's just call a spade, Eliot. Anything can happen, but they lose this game, they're not making the playoff. They're not making the Big Ten championship game. And that would be what's amazing about that is this. And I'm not saying it's going to happen. I don't think it's going to happen. I haven't made my pick yet, but I think Iowa will win this game. But it is the first road game, and there are challenges with Minnesota's rushing attack. They've given Iowa plenty of issues defensively. But I guess I look at this game and I'm thinking Minnesota has an opportunity to kind of end Iowa's hopes of the bigger goals. For the first time, Minnesota didn't normally play Iowa this early, but when's the last time Iowa has been eliminated early? You'd have to go back to 2000, I believe. Boy, that's a great question. This would be a better Mark Rogers question. Mark's going to, when you hop off here in about 45 minutes, but I'm thinking 2019, they went 11-2. And I'm trying to think of where they were late in the season. 2020, of course, they were 6-2. Should have made the Big Ten championship that year if it wasn't for blowing a 17-point lead early in the season to Northwestern. 21, they won the West, went to the Big Ten title game. 22, if they don't blow a game against Nebraska, they back their way into the Big Ten championship game and an 8-4 record. And then last year they made the Big Ten championship game. So it's going to be a very weird, ominous feeling, Eliot, if Iowa loses this game Saturday. Like, to me, there's more pressure with this game than we've seen in any conference game this early in the season in years. And I don't think that's hyperbolic whatsoever.
Right, and they put that pressure on themselves with the Iowa State loss. Yeah.
Absolutely.
It's an indication of where we are in terms of the college football landscape, right? Like, we were talking about the 12-team college football playoff at Big Ten Media Days. It's like, is this a realistic possibility or goal for this team? And we were having that conversation for a reason. I mean, they went 10-2 without an offense last year. Like, if this game, and we saw it go sideways last year, they should have won that game, right? By most accounts, it wasn't a fair catch, right? Like, PTSD. Sorry, Iowa fans, but the margins of error were so razor thin throughout the entire year last year, and if that defense plays the way it did last year, you don't like that margin of error is so much thicker, so to speak, right? Like they don't have those types of issues that they did. And granted, now because Iowa's offense isn't so astronomically bad, other opposing teams have to take shots they didn't have to take last year. So the defense, by way of that, does look a little bit worse because they've allowed these big plays. And these are things that also, this is something that happened last year within the first 3 weeks too against Western Michigan. I think they allowed that one really big touchdown pass to start the game, and then they blew them out of the water the rest of the way. But you know, I'm kind of going all over the place here, but to me, there should be I don't know if concern is the right word, but like being aware of how things can go sideways. And if there's any indication of that, it's last year. I think Iowa's the better football team. I picked them to win on our podcast this week, and on our board, we do a score predictions thing on our board. But, you know, it wouldn't surprise me if things somehow do go sideways in this one.
It's just wild to me that and who knows what things are going to look like after Kirk walks away. But Iowa fans have gotten spoiled and malnourished at the same time. They've been malnourished of an offense for years, and yet spoiled with this habitual way about winning close games that Kirk Ferentz, I mean, he has mastered it for so many years, and specifically since the offense has been horrid, they have found ways to win close games. And a big part of that, you could argue, there's a lot of factors here, but if they somehow lose Saturday, people are going to start thinking, okay, what changed? Why are they now losing close games? Because they're not going to get blown out by Minnesota Saturday. I think we can all, either Iowa wins this game or Minnesota wins a very close contest. Minnesota's not built to score a ton of points. They haven't scored it. I mean, they scored 27 against a horrific Nevada team. Maybe I'm being unfair to Nevada, but they were picked dead last in the Mountain West preseason. I just think the way Kirk Ferentz has mastered winning the close game, I think what happened last week 2 weeks ago against Iowa State, it shell shook some people because they did exactly the opposite of what they have done. And, you know, you mentioned the game last year, and that's going to be brought up on the NBC broadcast throughout Saturday night. What happened with that Cooper DeJean call? But there's a perfect example, Eliot, where they lose a close game, but you can kind of argue the refs took it from them. Like you can argue that Iowa still found a way to win that game. That was one of the more painful offensive contests, and there have been a lot of them. One of the more painful offensive contests. I remember when that punt sailing into Cooper DeJean, I remember thinking, he's got to make something happen here because they can't go down the field. This game's over. I mean, unless he makes something happen. And what does he do? He makes a hero-like play. I mean, something I've never seen anything like it, frankly. A hero-like play. And whether you think it's the right call or not, I mean, there's some people out there that I guess say, well, technically speaking, I still think it was a terrible call.
Yeah.
And other people have went on the record. I saw Aaron Rodgers was quoted. What was that earlier that I saw? He of course talked about it on the Pat McAfee show after it happened last year. So like, it's not just Iowa fans. It's not just a homerism thing to say. I guess my point is, like, even when they've lost close games, they've had situations like that where it's been a real unorthodox way of losing. They don't often lose close games like they did against Iowa State a week ago. And maybe part of that, I mean, I think it's fair to say they had Torrey Taylor for 4 years. They had Cooper DeJean for 3 good years. Both those guys are gone. Those guys were so big, not only on defense if you're Cooper, but both those guys were so big on special teams, not just in the return game, but in the punting game, in the gunning game. So it is, I know the narrative this week has a little bit of the narrative has been, why have Iowa's punting numbers dipped so much? Well, they've got a freshman punter in here. And I know Torrey Taylor was phenomenal in 2020, but not everybody is Torrey Taylor of 2020. I don't think Reese Dakin's been all that bad. Frankly, I thought he looked pretty good second half against Troy over the weekend, and that gives me reason for optimism. He's got to can become more consistent with his leg.
He's also 19. Torrey was 4 years older than him coming in.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, and here's what we're not remembering. He did not enroll. Did he enroll early, Eliot?
He did. Yeah.
He did enroll early. Okay. So there's my mistake. So he did enroll early. So he got a full spring. And then, of course, he got summer of conditioning. But he's a big frame, big guy. And it's not easy to punt a football 55, 60 yards. And Torrey Taylor makes it look easy. I'm telling you, Reese Dakin is going to be the real deal. And when that light switches on, I think they're going to have yet another Ray Guy candidate. He's been inconsistent. The gaffes against Iowa State have been well documented, and it took a lot for Iowa to lose that game against Iowa State. It took basically red zone malpractice, in my opinion, not giving the ball to Caleb Johnson more than once in how many red zone runs, mostly passes, how many pass plays they run down there. And then the other aspect of this, all the late half and late game gaffes, just game management, clock management gaffes. And yet, in spite of all those gaffes, Iowa State still had to hit a 54-yard field goal on the road. And they did. But that just shows you, when the way Iowa plays, they do so much right. It kind of makes us understand better, why do they win so many close games? Well, that's why. But when a few of those things don't go right, the perfect storm can brew. There's just no margin for error now. And if we expect Iowa to lose at Columbus, which I think most people do, you can't lose this game. You can't lose to Washington. You got to beat Nebraska in week 12, because you're not getting into the playoff with 3 losses. Now, if they go to Columbus and shock the world, then you've created margin for error. You've gained back what you lost with that loss against Iowa State. But believe you me, and you know this, Eliot, would have been a lot easier to call upon a win at home against the Cyclones than a win on the road against the Buckeyes.
You know what else? Minnesota hasn't helped them to start with that loss to UNC. Wisconsin obviously didn't help them getting slaughtered by Alabama at home. I'm trying to think. There's another decent team.
What doesn't help them? What doesn't help them, Eliot, is UCLA looks like hot garbage.
That too.
I give Cignetti credit at Indiana. That's a game that I said the other day with Mark Rogers. I said, hey, that's a game I'm glad I would have to play. But in hindsight, I'm like, well, maybe that'd be a good resume building game if they had to play Indiana. Same thing could be said for Illinois. Who would have expected the Illini to be in the top 25 heading into week 4? But here we are, and they're not on the schedule. They've been on the schedule for how many years now, being in that division. So, again, I go back 2 years ago when Iowa lost that game to Iowa State, and we knew how bad that offense was. And they ended up, they had 4 losses heading into the last week of the season. The difference was the division. And so a lot of people put their chips on a chance at the 12-team playoff this year. Now that margin for error has been dwindled, okay, you kind of fall back on Big Ten title chances, but now it's the top 2 teams. And regardless of, Michigan being down and Penn State looking vulnerable, they looked vulnerable a few weeks ago against a directional Michigan team. there are so many good teams in this conference and so many teams in this conference that I have a hard time seeing you being able to get to the title game without at least an 11-1 record. Because I think Ohio State's likely to go undefeated or 11-1, and there's probably going to be at least one other 11-1.
Penn State, USC, Oregon, like off the top of my head, Ohio State.
Yeah,
like
that's assuming Michigan doesn't figure it out. We haven't even started Big Ten play. I mean, it's assuming they don't get it figured out.
Their one loss is to the number 1 team in the country. Yeah, and they're making a quarterback change, so who knows? Maybe something comes together for them. But it's not an easy path to get into the playoff now, and they did that to themselves. I mean, not that it was going to be an easy playoff or easy path to the playoff in the first place, right? Like it was going to be difficult, but the schedule going 11-1 was something that gave them the best chance to get in there. 10-2, man. I mean, you said it. Like, I don't know, and that's the conversation we were having before the season started, right? Like, and 10-2 with a tougher schedule. If Iowa played Michigan, if they played USC, if they played Penn State, if they played Oregon on the schedule, right, and they went 10-2, that's very different than 10-2 with the schedule that they've got. Like, who's the toughest team that they play the rest of the way other than Ohio State? Is it Wisconsin? Is it Washington? Like
Nebraska at this point,
right? Yeah. And I mean, Nebraska. Yeah, I'm still a little hesitant with Nebraska because of who they played to start, but Nebraska has looked very good, and it wouldn't surprise me if they were among the best teams there in the Big Ten with what they've done so far. And I'm a believer in Matt Rule. I thought they'd turn it around this year. I'm, again, still a little hesitant. But like you said, I mean, Nebraska is probably the best team. They play the rest of the way. But, I mean, you and I have both watched a lot of Hawkeye football. It wouldn't shock us if they lost. I mean, it wouldn't absolutely floor us if they lost to Minnesota this weekend, or if they dropped one to Wisconsin, or Northwestern. Like, they've lost to worse Northwestern teams than we've seen. And Northwestern's pretty bad this year. But
I promise we will not spend this whole show talking about what happens if Iowa loses. But if Iowa loses, Eliot, let me repeat what I said at the outset. They're basically done.
Yep.
Unless they find a way to, because it will take a win at Columbus and a win in every other game. So they're likely done as it relates to any postseason aspirations beyond a solid bowl game like an Outback Bowl or something. I know it's not the Outback Bowl anymore, but
right.
That's where we're at. And it's just, that's a dose of reality for people who have been so used to being able to, even though Iowa's won a lot of games in the last several years, even when they haven't, the division has kept them in it. They don't have that to fall back on this year. Let's go to our call-in line. We've got James on hold. James, welcome.
How you doing?
Good. How are you, sir?
Good. I feel like you guys are bringing up the point of, like, the conference and this. I feel like it's, and I hate to say this because I want us to make a Big Ten championship game, but I feel like it's going to be really hard for us to make a Big Ten championship game in the near future just because, like, how tough the top half is, if that makes sense, right? Because, like, I feel like if we get Oregon and Ohio State, like, let's say, who would we get? Oregon and Penn State?
James, you're preaching to the choir, buddy, because I am not someone who.
Yeah, no, I'm just saying. So, like, I don't think that's the way where we can look in. We have to beat Iowa State. I think Iowa State's going to have to be a game where we win every year to have a chance at getting into the playoffs, I feel like, because I don't know if we're going to win.
Yeah, we talking about Big Ten championship or are we talking about playoff? I thought you said
the Big Ten championship. Like, I'm talking about the Big Ten championship as a thing to get to the playoffs, but I don't think we're going to get in the Big Ten championship game. So I think we have to beat Iowa State to have a chance at getting the playoffs every year because we can only afford 1 to 2 losses, and Iowa State can't be that second loss, if that makes sense. We play a tougher game.
Here's the situation. First of all, last year, I rarely travel to quote-unquote cover games.
Yeah.
I did last year because I remember saying to myself, this may be my last chance to go cover an Iowa game in the Big Ten championship. Like, honestly, seriously, I mean, we don't know that, but these super conferences, I've got a better chance of being able to travel, and so do you, Eliot, being able to travel to a college football playoff game involving Iowa than another Big Ten title game. Now, I think now, with that loss to Iowa State as it relates to this season, the odds are basically even because they dropped a game out of conference. It does not affect them in conference. But, James, the schedule is still very workable. And if there's any year where they're going to make the Big Ten championship game, it's still in year one with the new format because of the schedule and because of the fact that, hey, they play Ohio State. But other than that,
I don't disagree with you. I'm just saying feel like we have to, like I say, we have to kind of win out. You have, other than Ohio State, you have to kind of win out to even have a chance. And like, it's kind of scary, but obviously, they're not looking at it that way, right? So like, that's not how the players are looking at it, right? They're looking at it one game at a time anyway. So for them, it really doesn't matter as much. I mean, it matters, but you know what I mean? They're not looking at it that way, if that makes sense, right? They're just looking at it as like another game. So
Well,
like for them,
there better be a sense of urgency.
yeah, there is, but I mean, like they're looking at it as like
better
they're
not
not
be
worried about that future. They're
another
trying to
game.
just win the game in
It
front
better
of
not
them.
be just another game.
They're
It
just
better
trying to worry about the game in front of you. You can't worry about but you can't focus on trying to make the playoffs because you don't want to do too much and then lose. Is what I'm saying.
that narrative that it's just another game. There's way too much on this game, and there's way too much with the pig and with what happened last year and with it being a road game. I don't know. I'm sure Kirk, to an extent, and Eliot, you were at the presser this week. I'm sure Kirk is going to play it off that way. But Eliot, do you think Kirk is treating this like just another game? Or do you think he's a guy he's not a big rah guy, but I would think there's an elephant in the room if you don't address what happened last year, the trophy, the implications of winning before the bye week and before the Ohio State game. Like, I don't know, with that much mounted, I would think maybe you take a slightly different approach to this game.
Kirk will tell you it's just another game, right? The players will tell you it's just another game. That's just how they operate with the media. But it would not surprise me in the slightest if behind closed doors, Kirk wants to step on the throat of the Gophers, like going from last season to this season. There's recognizable, I don't know if disdain is, I think that's a little strong, but a recognizable dislike for PJ Fleck and the Gophers by Kirk Ferentz. Would not surprise me in the slightest if he's got, a little bit of that edge to him behind the scenes. And, players might say they don't remember last year, but they remember last year, right? Or not remember, but, they don't look at it. They don't think about it. Yeah, they do. Like, you can't that's a function of being human, right? And I understand your point, James, in that in thinking about it and approaching it as not necessarily just another game, but focusing on the week at hand, right? Like I think that's what he's trying to say.
That's what my point was. They're focusing on the week at hand. They know the bigger picture, but they're focusing on it week by week. But they know the bigger picture. They know they have to win, but they're focusing on everything week by week, knowing they still have to take care of business. That's what I kind of meant at that point.
Yeah, I get you. By the way, real quick, somebody in the chat wanted me to put this up here. Eric says, "Are you trying to look like Conan O'Brien tonight, or is this just a coincidence?" Conan O'Brien. I never thought about that one.
That's first too. It's probably just the angle. Eric, thank you for pointing that out. I had somebody comment on a podcast that we did on YouTube too that my hair was wild. It's like
it is the hair. That's the only thing.
It's a little long right now. Sorry, I just got done working out before this too. So yeah, I promise I'm not trying to give Conan O'Brien. I am definitely not going to tell my girlfriend that somebody said that. So she'd be like, "Oh my God, no."
I've never been a big Conan O'Brien guy. Anyways, James, anything else?
I was gonna say, I feel like we need to focus on like, what is your guys' biggest like worry, defense or offense? Because I know, to me, it's not defense because I know they gave up big plays last year. In conference or in non-conference, they gave up 7 last year, 7 explosive plays in non-conference last year, and it was 13 the rest of the way, wasn't it? Something like that.
Correct.
So like that doesn't really scare me as much, but like I also don't know how good Brosmer is, so I don't know if they can take us apart like that. But
I am not concerned about anything with the Iowa defense.
Yeah, that's what I would say too. But I didn't know some people are in the chat. I'm not, but some people in the chat are. But
yeah, well, I'm concerned with nothing as it relates to the Iowa defense. I'm not concerned with the back end. I'm not concerned with defensive line depth. I'm not concerned about TJ Hall or Xavier Wampa. I'm not concerned about any of that because I don't think Minnesota has the dogs this year to really take advantage. And yes, I'm comparing what Minnesota has to what Troy has. And I'm also looking at recent history. You brought it up, James. Last year, the stats Don Patterson brought up on Sunday, 7 explosive plays in those first 3 games in 2023. And 2 of those games were against Utah State and Western Michigan. I know it was brought up at the press conference this week, Eliot, but I remember having very similar dialogue after the Western Michigan game, at halftime of the Western Michigan game, because they were giving up big plays. People were panicking. And so, excuse me, That's why it's so important that you just get by this week. I mean, I don't really have any concerns because I don't think Minnesota's equipped to take advantage of it. But then you get a bye week and you get a game that nobody expects you to win. And then I feel like Phil Parker, if he's not there by then, he won't get there. And what reason do we have not to have confidence in the idea that he'll get there? So Minnesota's had a history of really good wideouts, James, but they're down at that position this year.
This year as much, yeah. This year as much. I know Donald Driver's son, Christian, I think is his name. He's been playing pretty well the first couple of weeks, but like they don't have that guy who their go-to guy. You know, they don't seem like right now they have that go-to guy that they usually have. You know, that one guy like Tyler Johnson or somebody else who they can throw the ball to. You know, every time or look that way every time. They don't really seem to have that this year.
Daniel Jackson is going to be their guy. I wouldn't say he's the talent of the receivers they've had in the past, but he's good. He's probably better than any receiver on Iowa's roster.
I mean, yeah, but I mean, he's not like a Tyler Johnson. I don't feel like where they like look at him every time. Like I feel like when they had Tyler Johnson, they kind of looked his way every time. They didn't throw his way every time, but they at least looked that way, you know. And then maybe looked it off and threw somewhere else. But like, I don't think
Johnson, Rashad Bateman, Chris Ottman. Let me ask. I don't know the answer to this question, and maybe you do, Eliot. But you brought up Darius Taylor, Minnesota's back, who did go off for 124 yards on just 11 carries last week. He also put up about 40 yards through the air, and had a touchdown, receiving touchdown. I'm curious though. Did not see any snaps against North Carolina.
He was hurt. He missed that game.
All right. Well, there's your explanation. A respectable number, but he's not had to carry the ball a lot. So they are splitting numbers as far as carries are concerned. They don't, and they have done that a lot. But Marcus Major has actually
he started that game against North Carolina where he missed, where Darius Taylor missed.
Yeah, so but I'm guessing those two guys, I mean, if you judge by the last two performances from Darius Taylor, he's still going to be splitting carries with Marcus Major. So
I believe he also went to the injury tent last week. So I'm not sure. And as far as I know, he's good to go for this game. I don't know that he's 100%. But yeah, it is something to track. And if he is splitting carries, I would imagine it's largely because of that injury factor. But in previewing our Minnesota game on Hawkcast this week with Dylan Callahan-Crowley from Gophers Nation, he didn't mention anything in terms of Darius Taylor's health. So as far as I know, he's good to go for this one.
It'll be interesting to see, and I hope for our sake we get the win, because it's definitely a big one. And after what happened last year, you need that win. You kind of get that monkey off your chest, and then you go into that bye week, and we always seem to play a little funky out of a bye week, right? Sometimes, we always seem to play a little out of a bye week. We're kind of a little funky sometimes. We don't always play our best, but
I'll still take a bye week before the Ohio State game.
Yeah, I will too. Yeah, I will too, especially when you always play that way too. But I'll talk to y'all later, and go Hawks.
Appreciate it, sir. Yeah, the schedule. I mean, we've discussed it, but I keep reiterating it. Survive in advance, and that's the margin for error. I mentioned this to Mark on Tuesday, Eliot, but just imagine any of those plays that happened against Iowa State. Cade McNamara spots Jacob Gill in the corner of the end zone down in the red zone, or maybe Conradi misses the 54-yard field goal. Not inconceivable. He missed a kick from inside of 40 or right around 40, doinked it earlier in the game. Maybe Iowa gets one more first down on that last possession, or maybe Kirk Ferentz doesn't take a delay of game penalty and cost his defense 5 yards. That was stupid.
Yeah.
But go ahead.
I was just going to say maybe Cade doesn't throw that ball across his body when there's a DB trailing him and on the backside. Like there's just so many things that went wrong in that game.
Yeah, and the red. I mean, I know that everybody's going to point back to, especially Kirk's going to point back to the red zone. Part of that was I saw an article, might have been whoever writes for the Des Moines Register on the Iowa State side, some article about what a great goal line stance from Iowa State, and I'm like, okay, yeah, a couple of those plays, like the one play where was it Kamari Moulton, they got blown up. I mean, it was just a free rush side. It was
terrible play design. Yeah,
it was not good protection. It was not a great call. But there's also the example of Cade McNamara just missing on a wide open Jacob Gill, and a Jacob Gill who had been in motion on that play, in pre-snap motion. So typically, as Don Patterson brought up, he would be an early part of your progression, especially down there in the red zone, guy in motion. I don't know how he missed him. But anyways, let's go back to our call-in line. We've got, I never know how to pronounce this name, Tlata Tony.
Close enough.
All right. I'm sorry. You feel free to correct me. It's way off.
Gotta be honest, I have never been a fan of Cade. Like, I bought into the hype at first, but seeing him play against Penn State, that kind of crushed my hopes on him. Like, he's not horrible, but I believe we have a better QB on the roster.
I'm assuming you mean Brendan Sullivan?
Yes.
Oh.
I just have a feeling that.
You think we see more Brendan this week, Eliot? More than just a couple? You think? First of all, will he be played in the red zone again? Because now they've shown that on tape, so that's not going to catch Minnesota off guard. Do they bring him back for red zone tries?
That would not surprise me. I mean, Caleb Johnson said it just outright in the post game last week. He's like, now Minnesota's going to be thinking we're going to be running the ball every time we have. So, I mean, like, that wasn't for no reason. I mean, what I am expecting this week is, now that we're in Big Ten play, it wouldn't surprise me if Lester adds a wrinkle, right? It wouldn't surprise me if Phil Parker adds a wrinkle, because now the games start to really, really matter as we're getting into Big Ten schedule. Obviously, every game matters now in the college football playoff landscape. But no, that would not surprise me in the slightest. If I had to bet, I would say we do see Brendan Sullivan. I don't know that we're going to see him between the 20s. But if somebody said put money on it, I'm saying Brendan Sullivan sees some snaps.
I am curious though, and caller, I can throw this back to you and get your take on this as well.
Yeah.
Because it's not like you have much confidence in Cade, but I am curious if Cade, given his struggles, first half against Illinois State, through the last 3 quarters against Iowa State, through half of Detroit, well, the numbers were fine, but honestly, I didn't think Cade looked great. The numbers were actually really good. I didn't think Cade looked sharp. I thought accuracy still lacked at times against Troy, but I'm guessing the numbers will override that for most people. I wonder, though, given that he's had a history of the erratic stretches of play, if he plays badly in the first half and they go into halftime down on the road, I do wonder. And I'm probably falling for the bait, hook, line, and sinker like I always do. I do wonder if perhaps we see Brent Collar.
I would really like to say yes, but knowing Kirk Ferentz, probably not.
Well, we haven't seen Kirk willing to go with a guy in the red zone other
That's
than
true.
Their starter until now. So maybe Tim Lester, as I've said since day one, and his hire, maybe there's a little bit of Tim Lester influence starting to kind of at least make Kirk more amiable to different ideas. And Kirk, I go back to this, but back at Big Ten Media Days, and Eliot, you were there, Kirk made the comment about having a package in for Sullivan. I can't imagine that was just referencing a red zone package.
I hope I'm wrong. I hope I'm wrong on this.
Yeah, I mean, the red zone package in itself is something that I think, looking back into the last few years, would have surprised a lot of us, just having another quarterback, right? And like the questions have been there around maybe playing 2 quarterbacks, and Kirk is like, we're not, gonna write everything off the table, right? Like if it's gonna help us win, we'll do it. But at the same time, he's Kirk Ferentz, right? Like I was not expecting to see Brendan, nor do I think. Well, maybe I should rephrase that. I did have a what?
I didn't expect it.
Yeah, I did have a source behind the scenes tell me that it was definitely a possibility, and it was more likely than not going into week 3. And I, even with the source telling me that and me putting it on our board, I remained skeptical, right? Like, and I trust my source, and of course it came to fruition. But that, I guess what I'm getting at here is, as far as seeing Brendan Sullivan more than we did on Saturday, I'll believe it when I see it. And I imagine you're in the same boat as me there.
Yeah. I just have a bad feeling that one of these games, Cade is gonna make a mistake that will cost us the game.
Well, he
Well,
kind of already has.
Yeah,
In a sense.
he'll do it again probably. And I'm like 60% sure at some point in the season, Brendan will be the star. Like, Cade has had 2 ACL tears. Like, it's not a stretch to say he's going to go down for the season again. Not that big of a stretch.
Let me just say this, and this maybe is where some of my confidence comes from, because I was really confident before the Iowa State game. They find a way to lose. They were up 13-0 in that game. You can very easily argue they should have been up 17-0 or 21-0.
Absolutely.
They dominated the first half. Dominated. And we've been saying this for years. If Iowa has a semblance of an offense, they're going to win a lot of games and win a lot more games comfortably. We've not seen that yet, in part because the offense, first half against Illinois State, they couldn't run the ball. Caleb Johnson suspended. Maybe that's part of it. You have Cade and almost historically bad performance the last 3 quarters against Iowa State. But most of it has been the big plays. I'm not putting it on the defense. I'm simply saying typically under a Phil Parker-led defense, we don't have any expectation for needing much from the offense to even win games. The fact that they're running the ball as well as they are now and still finding ways to lose tells us that it's more than just Cade. The defense has given up an unorthodox amount of big plays. However, that's why I'm confident, because they've done this in non-conference in the past. The difference is they found a way to win games. So I'm assuming that switch will still turn on for the defense, and they'll become one of the best explosive play defenses in the country, and it's certainly in the conference. And if they do that, I still think they're going to have a lot of wins in the conference, and I think they're going to have a lot of lopsided wins. I'm not saying they're going to blow teams out 40-0, but like I could see them going up to Minnesota this weekend if they can run the ball the way they have, the way that offensive line has been blocking and mauling people up front. They win. I could see them winning 23-6 very easily. I could see that
20 to
27.
Potentially, that's 24 points. That would be a very good outcome. Very good sign.
I just don't think there's that much. Like I say, they could have easily had a 21-point lead against Iowa State, and they've made an adjustment with the red zone. Hopefully, I mean we've only seen it against Troy, very small sample, but those little things get cleaned up. They're not that far off from really dominating teams. They won by 3 touchdowns against Troy when they gave up 3 super explosive plays to one guy, and they still won by 3 touchdowns. So,
who's probably playing either Power 4 football or in the NFL next year?
You know what I was thinking?
What I heard from Troy guys is that Devontae Ross ran a 4.240.
So my question is, Eliot, I know that Iowa's recently gotten in trouble for tampering, but shouldn't Iowa be the first one that calls him when the transfer portal window hits? I mean,
yeah,
they have to be.
I put that on our board, and folks, it might have been actually on Twitter. It was either on our board or on Twitter. Somebody was like, Brad Heinrichs needs to be in their locker room at halftime. Yeah.
Put somebody in there. All right, Colin, anything else?
No, not really. Good night.
Appreciate you calling in, sir. All right, we'll move to our next caller here after this comment. Shannon says, I want to see Brendan Sullivan go in for more than a couple plays, especially if they're up multiple touchdowns. Well, it took a 40-0 lead against Illinois State for him to see the field. And my disappointment, Ellie, is they're up 38-17 against Troy, and he's in there with 4 or 5 minutes to go. Give him a pass play. As Don said on Sunday night, it's not disrespectful to pass the ball with a backup. Now, if you're going over the top like Michigan did against Iowa in the 21 Big Ten championship game, that's a different story. But it goes back to Kirk being completely risk adverse. But it's not logical. Okay, you're up 3 scores, and they were willing a year ago in week 3 for Max White to score a touchdown because he was running the ball. Remember that?
Yep.
Remember they got up and ran and scored a touchdown. It was a little bit controversial. Some people, I was even kind of mildly critical of it. I thought it was a weird look because we were also in the middle of the drive to 325. You know, we were in the middle of that whole melee too. So anyways, if you're going to put him in, and if somehow they get another opportunity, they may not have another opportunity here in the near future. Like I say, I could see them blowing out Minnesota, but will they be up by 21 or more against anybody left in the schedule? That's questionable. And I just think it was an opportunity missed there, up 21 against Troy, and certainly up 34-0 and then, or 33-0 and then 40-0 against Illinois State. But they do what they do, and I think that ultimately comes back to Kirk. I'm guessing that if Tim Lester had it his way, he'd like to see what his quarterback could do in a real game. But my guess is that before a drive like that, Kirk says he's not dictating every play to Tim. But Eliot, do you have any doubt that Kirk says, "Let's just run the ball"? I mean, he's just
no, not even a little bit.
I think it's just kind of that understanding that we're not putting the ball in the air, even though we're up 33-0 and we've got a backup in.
Yeah, in mentioning giving Brennan Sullivan the opportunity to throw the ball, like the one time he's thrown the ball this year, it was this, right? It was a little flip to Addison Ostrenga in this last game. Everybody knows that, right? And if that's a trend that continues, right? If it's a trend where he is not allowed to throw the football when he's in the game, you're effectively giving your quarterback of presumably the future, unless you bring in another transfer next year, or Marco Lainez takes a big jump, or James Rezar is suddenly, a Big Ten quarterback after 1 year under Tim Lester. You're giving him a year off, right, of playing competitive football. And that's not good for anybody. It's giving him some confidence, putting the ball in the air, completing it in front of 70,000 people, right? Like it's a net positive if you let Brennan Sullivan come in the game, get his feet wet, throw the ball around a little bit.
And let's address the big elephant in the room that some people have been pining for several weeks. I have not been, but it's a fair opinion. And that is, maybe it'd be smart to go with Brendan Sullivan. Like, maybe it'd be smart to actually go with him, because there's more. As Hayden Fry and that staff, the way they stood for these things, when you had two guys that were very close, you go with the younger guy because he's got more room for growth. He's got higher upside. Kirk is the exact opposite. He's got two guys that are very close. He's going to defer to the older guy. I don't get that really, but to me, it's logical. So now I'm not saying they're dead even. I think you and I heard similar things in fall camp, that it was a lot closer than people made it out to be. But the fact that Cade got the majority of snaps against the ones throughout the month of August was an indicator that I don't think Kirk ever batted an eye. Cade was going to be the starter from day one. Let's go back to our chat. So Doc P giving us an update from the only college football game going on tonight. App Store getting beat down by South Alabama. So I wonder if this is the Google App Store, the Apple App Store, or if it's the Amazon App Store. I'm joking. I know Doc P. He corrected himself in the chat later. So App State apparently beating down on South Alabama. Wasn't there an Iowa kid that was at South Alabama? Kid that was recruited?
I have no idea.
He must have graduated. I think there was a back that grew up in Des Moines. That was probably before you were covering the beat. Anyways, Esther wants to know, when's the Ohio State game? That is in 2 weeks, a little over 2 weeks. I get the bye week. And then, Eliot, are you going out to Columbus for the game? I'm assuming you are.
I am. Yep. I'm heading out there. I'm also going to Fort Wayne the night before to watch Jimmy Sullivan, 2025 quarterback. So pretty excited about that. That'll be my first time seeing him live. But yeah, I'll be out at the shoe. That'll be my first time at Ohio State. So I'm looking forward to that. It's one of those games where is it like, first thought is, is it even worth it to go all that way for a game where they might get blown out? But like, what if they pull it off? That would be an all-timer to go to. So yeah, I will be out there.
I know people are probably getting nauseous with me repeating this over and over again, but I just want to go to the Beef House again. And you've heard me say this. You've heard me say this, but you go right through Indiana. You go that direction. At least that's what the GPS told me when I looked it up. Because I've never been to Columbus either. We have some friends that recently moved out to Columbus, so we have a place to stay if we go out. But that's a long drive. It's about a 10-hour drive, I think, from Ames. It's probably a little over 8 hours from Iowa City.
Something like that. I'm glad to be breaking it up and going to Fort Wayne first. I'm going to stop at the high school and talk to Jimmy and his coach a little bit, and then go to the game that night and then head out. I'm excited, man. And you know, while we're here to direct the conversation, you want to talk any recruiting?
Yeah, I was going to ask you about Jimmy Sullivan. How's he looking here early in his season?
Well, to tell you the truth, I haven't been watching super closely. I go different games week to week. This last week, I was in Norwalk to watch Luke Brewer, who's a 2027 tight end, just debuted as a 4-star for us. But from what I've seen, running the ball really well to start. Carroll is struggling. They were at the state championship game last year. I think they finished the runners up in Indiana. Don't quote me on that. I'm pretty sure that's the case, but must have lost a decent contingent of their contributors from last season because they've kind of struggled to start this year. But running the ball really well, showing off that speed. I like his release. It's really quick. He's a pretty accurate quarterback. So yeah, I'm excited to see him at the beginning of this year. I don't know that he'll be the solution or the next great Iowa quarterback. He is a 3-star for us. Did have some other Big Ten offers. Michigan State came in and offered. I'd have to look at his offer list here, but a few other Power 4 schools involved. So yeah, I'm really excited to see what he does and get my eyes on him in person.
This is not a current recruiting topic, but it is relevant to this discussion. We're talking about quarterback play. It's going to be interesting because Cade's done after this year, whether he finishes the year or not. This is it. So next year, assuming that they don't bring in another transfer, Jimmy Sullivan, James Rezar, Marco Linez, Brennan Sullivan. Yeah, Jimmy Sullivan, Brennan Sullivan. So you got 2 Sullivans, 4 guys there, and then Jackson Stratton perhaps as a walk-on. That's assuming everybody stays put. Do you
Ryan Fitzgerald as well? They're bringing in as a preferred walk-on from Loyola Academy, Pat Fitzgerald's son, in the 25 class.
So they're going to carry 2 walk-on quarterbacks? You actually think that's going to happen?
Unless Jackson Stratton transfers, yeah.
I think something has to give there. I could be wrong on this. You probably know better than I. I'm guessing the staff plans on somebody. I'm guessing they just kind of assume.
Yeah.
Even walk-ons. I mean, who's the kid that just went to Colorado State, basically traded places with Stratton?
Tommy Paholski.
Yeah.
Yep.
So it will be interesting. And by the way, Stratton's a long way from home. I hope he's enjoying his time here, but he's from La Jolla, California. That's a long way. We're far removed from sea lions.
Yeah. Which, by the way, they're recruiting a 26 from La Jolla too, Cash Herrera, who was just
right.
on campus. Yep, and he just debuted as a 3-star for us too. I really like his film. He's out from Bishop's out there. Good kid. He's probably going to be between Iowa and UCLA. And like you said earlier, UCLA is kind of a dumpster fire right now. They are going to be closer to home for him. But Tim Lester and Kirk have made an incredible first impression on him. He's their guy in the 26 class right now. And I like him a lot. He's a little undersized, but I do like him. He's quick release, really good feet. One of those guys who's not quite a dual threat, but mobile. So that's just something to have on the radar as well.
When's the last time I don't think we could ever say this. I could almost guarantee we would never be able to say this under Kirk Ferentz that you have a quarterback room, assuming Kirk returns for next season. And I think that's likely with the contract, but I also think they're losing a lot. So if there's ever a time to get out of Dodge with the schedule getting more difficult and losing all this leadership, maybe it's after this year, but discussion for another day. But as it relates to the quarterback room, they will have nobody that's considered to be immobile, not a single player. If everything stands now, not counting walk-ons, Jackson Stratton is not a great mover. At least he didn't show that on tape. I'm intrigued by him because he's a former Washington scholarship commit. And, but anyways, I digress. It will be an athletic room. Who would you guess? I mean, I'm assuming you're going to go with Brendan, but right now, if you had to predict the 2025 starter, would it be Brendan?
Yeah. Full stop. Only way anybody takes over is if Marco Linez takes that big jump in year 3. And, that's kind of how Iowa operates. It's like in year 3, it's go time, like you gotta, you got to make things happen once year 3 comes around. And if he does, he makes that big jump, maybe it is Marco. But for now, it's Brendan Sullivan to me, and I think he's the clear number one option at quarterback.
T. Hink says, I asked Kirk, I'm assuming he's talking about last night, about Brendan Sullivan, and Kirk said he wouldn't rule out the idea of playing Sullivan in the red zone. So I'd like to know what the exact quote was from Kirk, because that seems like an odd statement to make, almost like, I don't know. That seems like an odd statement to make when you just debuted him and he ran. It's not like it was just a trick thing or a gadget type deal. They actually sent him out there multiple times in the red zone when they were down there. So I would almost think it'd be stranger if they didn't do that this week. I mean, if they go out there this week against Minnesota and go with Cade and don't score, that's going to look really bad. It's going to look really bad on the staff. That you would do something with, albeit against Troy, something that worked in the red zone, and then you go away from it. That would be very strange. Speaking of going away from things, Eliot, you weren't around as far as covering Iowa in 2017, 2018, 2019. But I brought this up with Mark and Don a number of times. Something that we saw that was very odd, and granted, they had very good skill position talent, above average, I'd say above average quarterback play if the last 5 years are any sort of an average with Nate Stanley at the helm. But they ran a lot of trick plays. And I mean, legitimate trick plays. I mean, we brought the polecat play up against Ohio State in 2017, the pass back to Tyler Clough. You bring up the pass. People don't remember Iowa ran, I believe it was a fake punt against Michigan State on the road in 2017, passed it to AJ Epinesa, who caught it for a first down. Colton Rastetter threw a pass over the shoulder of defensive lineman Sam Brinks for a touchdown on the road against Penn State. They shoveled a snap to TJ Hawkinson, who ran end around against Minnesota on the road. All those are on the road. The only one not was the Ohio State game with the polecat play. And then for some reason, they went away from it all. And I think they ran one, maybe two plays. I think just one in 2019. And so, Mike, I've asked LeVar Woods this question, and he's basically given me the hum-ho response like, well, it all depends on what the defense shows us. And I think that's kind of a load of garbage, because when we have this big of a sample size, we've now went 5 seasons without a single trick play. It makes me think something switched, something changed. Maybe they just really liked Colton Rastetter was really involved with those trick plays. He was kind of a below average punter, but an above average gadget punter, if there ever was such a thing. Maybe it's because Tyler Clough went into podcasting and is no longer the long snapper. I don't know. But I'm interested to see, because Eliot, with the offense, and I'm not saying Tim Lester is going to be behind special teams trick plays, but they've struggled in the red zone to convert. They've already shown the Brendan Sullivan methodology, I guess, if you will, down in the red zone. Maybe, down there is normally where you run a trick play. So wouldn't it make sense? Not that you want to base your red zone offense on trick plays, but Eliot, if you're struggling to score touchdowns down there, why not maybe think about running a fake field goal if you're kicking a very short field goal, right? Am I wrong on that?
Yeah, I mean, no, I don't think so. And I mean, if I believe, oh my gosh, correct me if I'm wrong. I think Ty Nissen has been the holder at this point for field goals. Okay.
Former quarterback.
Oh, there you go. I knew he was a punter at Iowa Western as well. So that's an option. Additionally, Reese Dakin has shown, and you talked about his frame, that guy's athletic. If he ends up being your holder, that's an option too. So, I wouldn't completely rule it out. I don't know if you'd call it a trick play, but there was that play that Iowa ran against Iowa State with TJ Washington in. It was like a flip forward to him, I think. I'd have to go back and look at the film, but that was probably the closest thing to a trick play in the red zone that we've seen at this point in time. And what happened? TJ Washington lost his footing and fell, and then they had to settle for a field goal. So if that's any sort of indication on top of what we know Kirk Ferentz to be, maybe they're going to be even more averse to that kind of stuff, risk averse. But then again, I think you hit it earlier in that, from what I can tell, Kirk has been much more willing to listen to Tim Lester than he would have been to his own son, to make adjustments, to do things differently. So maybe, what did I say? What was it, like half an hour ago? I'm expecting some different wrinkles from Tim Lester, from Phil Parker in this game against Minnesota. So maybe we do see it in the red zone this week against the Gophers.
Last thing I'll say, Eliot, and I appreciate you taking this last hour. I brought this up to a couple different people. It was brought up, I think, on the show with Coach Patterson Sunday. It is a little strange to me that it's been a punter who has functioned as the Iowa holder for quite some time, going back to Colton Rastetter, Torrey Taylor. Now, Torrey Taylor was a very good holder. In fact, it sounds like he's holding for the Bears. And now it's a backup punter in Ty Nissen. And of course, Don Patterson brought up, okay, so you're traveling a backup punter, which is not always a thing that you would do. So that's interesting. I'm not saying they're going to not travel him, and that'd be kind of stupid to all of a sudden debut a different holder because you're on the road. But I guess my point is, hey, I remember the Tony, I'm young enough to remember the Tony Romo fumbled field goal hold. You remember that? And it was in the playoffs years ago. And that play just is like burned on my brain for some reason. My point is, hey, there's a history of a lot of backup quarterbacks. I even remember, I'm going to say the wrong name, but John Winkie under Ricky Stanzi's time at Iowa. I believe that might be the last time that a quarterback has been the holder. Maybe we saw a little bit of holding from the kid that transferred to Eastern Michigan, Tyler Wiegers. Maybe I'd have to go back. But my point in saying that is you're maybe less likely to run fake field goals with a guy who, like Torrey Taylor, it was on the record from LeVar Woods several times that he couldn't throw. So, I mean, he's an Australian guy. He doesn't throw football. So,
yeah.
But Ty Nissen I was told he did play some quarterback in high school. So whatever that means, I mean, that would tell me you've got a guy there who, why couldn't you have that play in your back pocket? So look for that. I'm not saying they're going to run it this weekend, but they've done it against Minnesota in the past. And history would say they do it more on the road. And with the red zone problems, maybe a perfect storm there brewing. Eliot, I know you and your guys are very busy during game week. Tell everybody where people can read your content. I know Adam Jacoby, your whole team is packing Hawkeye Beacon full of content.
You got it. Hawkeye Beacon or Iowa.rivals.com. If you're not a premium subscriber, you can do that. We have a ton of content behind the scenes, whether that's recruiting or with football, basketball, all that plugged in behind the scenes there at Hawkeye Beacon. So we'd love to have you there. Podcast is called Hawkcast. We're on all platforms: YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify. Go listen to that once you're done. Listen to the live stream with Corey. We got our preview up with our guy from Minnesota. So yeah, of course you can follow me on Twitter. It's at Eliot Clough. It's right down there. So yeah, would love to have you.
By the way, did you get that double cheeseburger that I told you about? On Wednesday morning?
I don't know the last time I've been to McDonald's, Corey. When was the last time?
50 cents. Am I the only guy that likes a bargain?
I'll save myself the money and not get cancer. So.
Fair enough.
Thanks, Corey.
I'll admit I did redeem mine, and it was probably not good. Hey, I've lost about 5 pounds in the last week, Eliot. So
hey,
eating pretty well. That was my cheat midweek, my hump day.
There you go.
So, Eliot Clough of Hawkeye Beacon. Follow him at Eliot Clough. Eliot, safe trap. You're going to. When are you heading out?
I'm not going to Minnesota. I am staying in town. I'm going to City High versus Iowa City West. Tons of Iowa players, or potential Iowa players in the future. You got Mason Woods, who's a commit. Julian Manson, son of Jason Manson, who's on the staff. Colin Witters, who's a 3-star guard. And then potential preferred walk-on in Parker Sutherland. Dom Salibi's on the roster. Do you know the name Kent Call, Corey? Does that name ring a bell?
No.
Okay. For your older listeners, Kent Call played running back for the Hawkeyes in the 90s. His son is a 2027 Dawson Call. He's on the roster at City High now, playing a little bit of running back. I went out and saw them practice earlier in the summer. Mitch Moore's got a fun new toy there in Dawson. It's physical specimen. He's a kid that you look at and you see the athleticism. He needs to learn defense a little bit more, but you look at him as like, oh, is that a future safety? Is that a future cash? So doesn't have a whole lot of recruiting interest at the moment, but I'm expecting that to pick up. So yeah, I'll be doing that, and I'll be covering the Minnesota game from home this weekend. But Ross Binder, who's on our staff as well, and Adam will be up there. So we will have all the coverage for you at Hawkeye Beacon, and of course on Twitter there.
Eliot, appreciate your time, sir. We'll do it again. It's always a fun time to chat. I know we didn't get to talk a lot about recruiting, but you'll learn more, it sounds like, this weekend with some prospects and over the next couple of weeks, and maybe we'll chat sometime in October. So appreciate your time, sir.
You got it. Thanks, Corey.
All right, folks. Eliot Clough of Hawkeye Beacon and Rivals. We're going to take a quick break. We'll be back with the one and only Mark Rogers, who broke a big-time book announcement today. If you are not following him, he's going to talk about that and the college football scene as a whole, and a couple of questions here in the chat that I want to throw Mark's way. We'll be right back. You're watching Hawkeye Hangout here from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Straight from the man cave, Kinnick Under the Kitchen. Authentic, original player artwork available for Hawkeye fans across the country. Now, in addition to the classic sign prints of Hawkeye greats like Chuck Long, Torrey Taylor, and Cooper DeJean, more authentic prints are coming, including current Iowa football stars Cade McNamara, Luke Lachey, and Xavier Wampa. There are so many options available. They make great gifts. Plus, your purchase benefits the athletes themselves and your favorite Hawkeye program from the Hawkeye of the Storm. Visit Under the Kitchen on Facebook, visit the stand each year at Fry Fest, or check out their website, underthekitchen.square.site. Again, that's underthekitchen.square.site. Check out Under the Kitchen today and get your authentic, original Hawkeye print. Nothing better than working with a bunch of companies that support NIL and the Iowa athletes that bring us joy to watch on Saturday, in this case, Saturday evening. So, again, Under the Kitchen on Facebook, Randy, small town guy who's doing a lot of great stuff for Hawkeye athletics, and very talented artist at that. So check it all out, underthekitchen.square.site or Under the Kitchen on Facebook. All right, folks, without further ado, we've got a special guest here, and this is like the first time, maybe the second time all time, that I am hosting a show, and we've got the older soul, Mark Rogers, here. See, you like how I zinged you there for a second, Mark? I'm not used to being the host here. This is going to be very awkward for me.
There was another time. There was another time, wasn't there, that you invited me on one of the Hawkeye Hangouts? I think there was one other time. Yeah.
It's been probably years since we've actually done this. So
I'm still a bit devastated because, according to Eliot, one trip to McDonald's puts your health at serious risk. Yeah. I'm slightly over one trip to McDonald's.
I was going to say, he must not have known you were in the queue because he would have had more compassion. He's ripping on McDonald's and on fast food. Did you see? You're the guy. Why did I waste my breath with Eliot? On Wednesday, it was National Cheeseburger Day. Did you know this?
No.
Oh, see, do you have the McDonald's app?
I don't.
Oh, well, see, it wouldn't matter. You have the McDonald's app, you get a 50-cent double cheeseburger from McDonald's. I did it. Buddy of mine did it. That's, you can't go wrong with it. 50 cents once in a while for a burger.
You and I had this conversation once about having too many fast food apps and that making it too easy to take advantage of all the deals. Well, you save money, but do you load up on too much fast food because you're going to save money? That's the problem.
Yeah, I've been trying to stay away from these. So I told Eliot before you hopped on that I think I may have told you I gained 5 or 6 pounds. I weighed myself 2 days ago on our last show, and since then I've lost 6 pounds. Now I know you fluctuate, right? There's a little bit of fluctuation that happens to some extent, but you don't fluctuate that much, do you?
No. I don't.
Okay. So anyways, I must be doing something right when I decide, hey, I'm going to cut out garbage, eat less, Maybe it's not healthy, but
I really wanted to go out to dinner tonight and get something decent. Well, not decent in terms of healthy decent, but something tasty to eat. But I reined it in, went for a walk. I injured my shoulder, so my exercise is limited to walking right now, only walking. And then I came back and made myself a decent meal, including asparagus,
okay.
and a salad, and some red meat. And that was it for me. But what I discovered this week, you'll love this. Maybe this will cause you to come visit me sometime. Is that I was going in a certain direction that I typically don't go. I've only lived here for 6 months, and they are building a Culver's, and it's like
you
it's
love
like
Culver's now, don't you? You love Culver's.
it's like 8 minutes from me, but then there's a Culver's in the other direction, like 7 or 8 minutes, and I was trying to determine which one would I go to because they seem to be equidistant from each other. But regardless of which direction I go now, I'll be in good shape.
I think it's so weird that there are Culver's in Florida, but that shows you how much the times have changed. Like I've told you, it's Wisconsin company and growing. I don't think, because I worked at a Culver's when I was 15 years old for less than but probably about a year in high school. And I don't think there were Culver's out of the Midwest at the time.
And these two are less than 15 minutes away from each other.
Yeah. Well, it shows you how much that brand. I remember when Culver's used to run. This is the last thing I'll say about Culver's, then we can get on to Arby's. But this shows you how much times have changed, because I remember when Culver's used to run non-high def ads, like during HD television. It was such a local brand that they ran local commercials, like that non-HD commercials. Is really weird. And now I get them all the time. I see them. Maybe it's because they know I like Culver's, but I see it on Facebook. I see it all over Google.
You know what you were bringing to mind that I have not thought about in years and years and years, but by making the comment that you just did, I am remembering that I was at the controls. I was running whatever the box mechanism at ESPN at the time. This was never my job. It was not my job, but it was one of those things where you kind of are challenged to learn something just to show that other people can do it. But so I ran the HD box on the first HD event at ESPN. It was a Sunday night baseball game in like 2004, 5, something like that. I ran the little mechanism that
work?
Transitioned it to HD. I don't remember anything else. I could tell you more about the baseball game that night. I know that it was an Angels Twins game or something like that. I know the Angels were playing, but I don't remember. It was, believe me, based on my technical knowledge, it was not a difficult task.
So because this is a Hawkeye hangout, I don't really care so much about losing viewers. Username username invalid says, tell Mark about the skin. So I'll just acknowledge it because we're here. We had some Yahoo decide to expose himself earlier on the show. See, Mark, you've had experience with these types of things. There are so many freaks. There's so many freaks. They have nothing better to do. I don't understand what's the joy behind. Because I could say so many things that would be quick and zingy. Yeah. I'm not going to say them on the air.
Yeah, you probably handled it with more class than I have in the past, where I just am compelled to go on a rant about how useless these people are and that they must just hate themselves and have horrendous lives and be utterly lonely. And that I take some liberties that I probably shouldn't, because I in a sense feel embarrassed for them. I feel horrible that the viewers have to see that, and it of course damages the show, and it's just everybody's got to kind of get back into the swing of things. Everybody's so mortified by it, but yeah, that's unfortunate. Just I don't know what goes through people's minds.
I honestly don't know that the individual exposed them. I just know the reason this person brought up. I just saw skin, and I just immediately blocked him. So, it's called quick trigger. You're used whenever somebody comes on without their camera on.
Yeah.
You're. This is America. You are free to be stupid if you want to be stupid. So, anyway.
Somebody asked me one time, a caller, to look at the helmet behind me, and I got to about here, and I went, "Uh-oh." And yes, sure enough, they were trying to get me to turn around too.
To expose, to embarrass
Yeah.
themselves on the
Yes.
air.
And
No.
so that it could last a little bit longer on air. Yeah.
I believe we call that classy. Erica, thank you for the super chat. Got Oreos, Mark. What's your take on our game this weekend? Is the boat going to sink? Have you made your picks? You've had to have made all your pick, right? Because you got a lot of money on this South Alabama App State. I'm joking, of course. But you have not made your pick. When do you make your picks for the weekend?
I make them in time to get them to our premium subscribers, which is Saturday morning at the latest. But I should do better than that because I got yelled at a couple times by some viewers because it was like late Friday and I had yet to make my predictions.
You don't have predictions on the Friday games?
Well, I'll get to the Friday game this week.
Okay.
Being what it is this week, I will get to the Friday game. I think that on one hand, when I review these teams, I think that Iowa as a 2.5-point favorite is not sufficient enough. But then I get drawn back into, okay, what has this series typically been? What was last year's game? I know that Iowa's broken free and blown out PJ's teams a couple times, but not often. Always come out with a win. Probably should be undefeated against PJ Fleck, of course. And last year, look at Iowa was a significantly better team last year, and they were playing that game at home. And look at what happened. They should get substantially better quarterback play, of course, this year as opposed to last year, because even after the Cooper DeJean play, of course, you guys know better than I do. They certainly had, what did they need? Maybe 15 yards to get Drew Stevens in range?
Well over a minute to go. And yeah, they had, I think, maybe 20 yards to give him a 55-yard field goal. And they couldn't do it. Deacon Hill ended up throwing a pick.
And that was not a great Minnesota team. So I do think that their quarterback play has probably improved, even though Ethan Kalkumanis had a better, bigger arm. I'm hearing good things about Max Brosmer. I watched the North Carolina game, most of it, but he seems to make better decisions, make the right decisions, be a better game manager than Kalkumanis was. So,
and they've got a healthy lead back now. I mentioned to Eliot, I watched the North Carolina game as well, and their star back Taylor didn't play in that game, so he's hurt. So he's looked good, looked really good against Nevada, but Nevada's picked dead last in the Mountain West. Ironically enough, I mentioned this to Don on Sunday, Mark. Maybe we talked about it Tuesday and I'm forgetting. Remember 2 years ago when Iowa played Nevada at home? They finished the game at like 3 a.m. Do you remember the final of that game?
27-0.
And you know the final of this game this past weekend, Minnesota and Nevada.
27-0. Yeah.
Just some irony there.
Yeah. That's like something I would remember, but you usually don't remember those things. You do really well with play-by-play.
I was also at that game, and I remember how painful it was to go into one delay and then go to a second. Eventually, I went home. I didn't go home. We were staying with some friends there in the Iowa City area, and we just left, which I've never done that ever in my life, left an Iowa game early. But, it's 2:30, 3 o'clock. Almost everybody. They finished that game with almost nobody in the stands. It was one of the strangest things I'd ever seen, and yet it wasn't so late that I resisted being critical on the postgame show because they didn't play anybody other than Petrus. They're up 27-0. They played nobody other than Petrus. So that kind of leads me into my question that I have for you, Mark. It was brought up earlier to Eliot. The idea of playing Brendan Sullivan in the red zone is a unique one. That's not something we've seen, even in spite of the fact that we've not seen an Iowa quarterback this year take any meaningful snaps outside of the 10 other than Cade McNamara. I still look at what happened last week as a pretty big deviation from the norm that is Kirk Ferentz with quarterbacks. So you just wonder, at least I wonder, is that a sign that Kirk is willing to budge a little bit more now as we head into a more important stretch of the season into Big Ten Conference play? Or is that the little inch that Kirk is willing to budge this year, and that's where it stops? I'd like to think it's the former, but I mean, that is a pretty big deviation from the norm. He's as we brought up, that you're up 27-0 against Nevada 2 years ago, and he didn't even put in a backup for garbage time in that situation. He put in Brendan Sullivan in real red zone scenarios this past weekend.
So you are proposing that Cade McNamara is exclusively the quarterback between the 20s, and then Brendan Sullivan is exclusively the quarterback in the red zone?
I don't know that I'm saying he's exclusively the quarterback, because that's the other intriguing part about this, Mark. Somebody, I think it was T. Hink earlier in the chat, said that they called into Kirk's midweek show on the radio last night. And I didn't hear the quote, but this is what T. Hink said in the chat, that Kirk said he's not dismissing the idea or ruling out the idea of playing Sullivan in the red zone. And my thought on that is, that's kind of a weird statement. I mean, you just did it multiple times in the last game. You're almost giving it away if you say, you're almost like you're saying we likely won't, but it's a possibility. We won't dismiss that. I would think that's, to me, if I'm Minnesota, and maybe Kirk's just trying to confuse people, but if I'm Minnesota and I'm looking at the tape from last week, I'm expecting Brendan Sullivan to come out there in the red zone at least the first try, and if it's successful, they're on. I mean, would you expect something different if you're an opposing team, especially given the fact that Iowa struggled so much in the red zone the week prior against Iowa State? It looked like what they did last week was a response to that, and it was successful. They scored touchdowns both tries.
Well, at least you've got a situation where this change-up quarterback is not just the change-up running mobile quarterback where it's very obvious that's his best skill set by far. He's just as capable of throwing the ball as Cade McNamara is, in my estimation. So there's still that threat's still there.
If he's just as capable, I said this earlier as well. If he is just as capable, he ought to be the guy.
Yeah, he should be.
Because he's also got another year in front of him in addition to the legs. And I don't know that he's just as good as Cade through the air. I have a hard time imagining he's worse than Cade, because Cade has not been particularly good. But I do think it's the comfort zone that Kirk is working within. He's just more comfortable with a guy he's known longer and has seen on the big stage.
That won 3 games last year?
You know what? Every time that gets brought up, Mark, he brings up what Cade did at Michigan every time. And he brings up what he saw in the 2020. He loves bringing up firsthand experience of what he saw from Cade in that 21 Big Ten championship game. But I am not, as I've said to you before, I'm not an advocate for benching the guy. I just think if it's Hayden Fry and this is a neck and neck battle, Brendan is the starter, because during the Hayden Fry era, that staff played the younger guy when there was a close battle because they had more upside and more time to grow. And Cade McNamara is done after this year. He's also playing, I don't want to say hobbled. That's unfair because he seems to be healthy, but he's coming off 2 serious knee injuries. He's clearly not as mobile as Brendan is. I just think it's going to be interesting. And the other thing I brought up with Eliot here a few minutes ago before he got off, this might be the most intriguing thing to follow. And I might just be flat out wrong. But Mark, you know, I've talked from 2017 to 2019, Iowa ran a bunch of trick plays, especially on special teams.
Exotics,
yeah. Exotics, but real I haven't used that word in a while. Exotics, but real trick plays. We're talking a pass with the punter. I remember even 2015, if you want to go a couple of years prior, remember the fake field goal at Iowa State where Marshall Kane tried to run it into the end of the half. It was a very odd call. Do you remember that? And it was kind of questioned. Iowa ended up winning the game, so it didn't matter. That was the CJ Beathard debut. His second debut in a real big game. Anyways, they tossed it to Marshall Kane, and he ran it. Here's what they did that play, Mark. They ran the clock all the way down. So they ran like 30 seconds off the clock, but then they needed like 30 yards. And Marshall Kane had like 20, 25 yards, but he got hit out at the 5, but they had no time left because they ran the clock down. And I remember Joel Klatt going on and on about, it was a well-conceived play, but they didn't allow themselves any time because they ran the clock all the way down. And my only thought was, well, maybe you're trying to sell it because nobody thinks you're going to fake it if you run the clock down, but that's a long ways to go. You're putting all that's not a Kirk. It was not a Kirk Ferentz move. And little did we know, 2 years from then, Iowa would run a bunch of trick plays more often than not on the hands of Colton Rastetter, their punter, who also functioned as the holder. And the reason I bring that up is they've gone away from trickeration in recent years, really since 2019. I think they ran one fake punt in 2019. I think Torrey Taylor had a fake punt a year or two ago where he wasn't supposed to fake it. And you remember that? I mean, I think it was against Ohio State, wasn't it? 2 years ago in Columbus. And he got lit and he got blown up. And it was not a good play. Not a good play. And he was mad about it. And of course, the staff was mad at him. But they had bigger problems than that. But the reason I bring it up is let's think about this scenario. Iowa has struggled in the red zone so far this season. They lost a game, in Kirk's opinion, because they couldn't convert in the red zone. So they demonstrated last week that Kirk demonstrated that it is a problem big enough, I think, from a Kirk perspective, to require a dramatic shift, a dramatic change, putting in a different quarterback. That's pretty dramatic for Kirk Ferentz. So he proved last week that red zone, he believed red zone is a problem. They put in Brendan Sullivan. It's successful. But then my next question is, what's the counter to now what Minnesota is going to give you in response to that? Because now it's on tape. It worked against Troy. If you're Minnesota, I would, going back to what I said to you earlier, I would think Minnesota is going to be expecting it. So if you're Iowa, do you go back to Cade? That would seem strange. And if you don't go back to Cade, okay, you go Brendan. Maybe that's probably the most likely scenario, that they'll have different plays in place for Brendan Sullivan. But my reason I bring it up is if they get down to the red zone, maybe they go with Brendan, maybe they go with Cade. But would it shock you to see Iowa run maybe a fake field goal for the first time since probably 2018? It wouldn't shock me. They've done it more often on the road with LeVar Woods than they have at home. And they've done it against Minnesota.
When I think of Kirk's reputation, I go back to his early days in taking over this program. And at that point, he had a different reputation. He had more of a Mark D'Antonio reputation as this. Now, Kirk's a very likable guy. I don't want to make him out to be some hardened football coach, because he seems like he's a very people-oriented person and so forth. But he's an offensive line guy. He believes in tough-nosed football, hard-nosed football, playing fundamentals, all those things. But like D'Antonio, he would enjoy running trick plays. He would enjoy surprising the opponent early in his career. While he was very believed, and I think this is the mark of most good coaches, that they believe that the foundational aspects of football can't be changed, and you have to master the fundamentals of football, being in the right place, tackling, blocking, doing all those things. But understanding that you can gain a huge advantage if you are showing some creativity, ingenuity, and developing a few of those plays to play off of the rock solid foundation that you've built, to show those formations, but be able to run things that are going to completely surprise the opponent. D'Antonio did that for years, and that's what Kirk did early in his career. And you point out some not so in the distance past when he was still willing to call those plays.
Well, that's what's interesting is, see, I was really young when Kirk got hired in '99, and of course there were some lumps as they tried to get this program back. But I just saw a video earlier today. Was it Owen Sebring of KJAN in Eastern Iowa posted a video of Kirk celebrating with his team after they won the Big Ten championship in '02, and that's a pretty quick turnaround going from where they were in '99, one game, but I don't remember the trick plays early in his tenure. In fact, I don't remember trick plays before 2015. Now, they probably ran a couple, but like when I really started honing in on Iowa football, it was like 2007, 2008. I don't remember trick plays in there. So that's why when I saw what happened in 2015, and then it was almost a cataclysmic shift and change in 2017. It was so odd because they ran so many and they all worked. You're throwing over the shoulder to AJ Epinesa and to Sam Brinks and to your long snapper, Tyler Kluver. And there's just these weird formations. They were the strangest things. Mark, they were strange. I still don't understand how Kirk stood there on the sidelines chewing his gum. He's uncomfortable with everything else. And yet he's okay bringing out the play against Minnesota where they got the long snapper out there in the middle of the field and nobody lined up next to him. You remember that play? He's just standing there in the middle of the field. Nobody's around him. It was just the strangest thing, and they've gone away from it. And I've asked LeVar about it, and LeVar has basically given the politically correct answer that, well, you can only run that stuff when the team shows the right. I don't think that's you can't convince me that over the past 5 years there have not been opportunities where an opponent has been vulnerable to that. I think it's more fair to say Iowa's not looking to do that or hasn't been looking to do that. And my next question would be, why is that? But I don't think we'll ever know the answer to that.
I want to put a cap on the quarterback portion of this because, again, to get back to the approach that I would have taken, and I believe we've talked about this enough that we generally agreed with what the approach should have been, or what we both agreed upon with Sullivan and McNamara. And that window is unfortunately passed. We're into Big Ten play. Got to take every opponent seriously to the degree that you're expecting. You can plan on a difficult game to a certain extent, but I would approach this Minnesota game. And my first thought when it's brought up that you could possibly go to another quarterback as a changeup in the red zone, how is another quarterback a better option in a certain portion of the field to run the entire offense? Okay, I understand where, even though I don't like this, I don't generally like it, where there are certain quarterbacks in college football that come in on a particular play where they have a specialty. They're a running quarterback, but they can pass just well enough that the defense has to respect that, and they're the changeup for that play. But to run the entire offense, let's say, for the entire series in the red zone, and I don't get where, if you've determined the other guy's QB1, he's the better quarterback, that just because you're in the red zone, that this guy's a better option at quarterback. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Might it just have been to get the other team on their heels and make them a little less poignant on, loading them? I don't know. I don't know. I don't have an answer for that. That'd be a good question for Coach Patterson. It'll be interesting to see if they do that this weekend. That will be one of the big things that I'll be intrigued, because I think they'll be able to run the ball. Even though this is a really good Minnesota defense, stats say it's really good through 3 weeks. Opponents have not been real strong, with the exception being North Carolina. It's a good Minnesota defense, but the way Iowa has blocked on the ground, and they've just mauled opponents, including Iowa State. The gaps, the space they've had to run has been enormous. And that's why I said earlier as well, they're not far off from winning games in lopsided fashion. In fact, they've won 2 of their first 3 games in lopsided fashion. Even though the Troy game was close at halftime and it shouldn't have been, they still won by 3 touchdowns. They still scored 38 points because they keep knocking off big plays on the ground. They scored 40 against Illinois State and had 6 at halftime. Mark, they had 13. They were up 13-0 against Iowa State in the first half with 2 unsuccessful trips to the 6 or inside the 6. They could have easily been up 17-21-0. They have had stretches of time where they've absolutely dominated a team. And the only the only thing that's different than the norm with Iowa winning close games is they've given up big plays. And against Iowa State, they gave up a couple of big plays. Well, you could argue 3 really big plays at the wrong time. Is it one bad play by Xavier Wampa and a guy goes for 75 yards, and then Sebastian Castro gets beat down the sideline and it ends up with a 54-yard field goal. But if you somehow remedy the red zone offense and your defense doesn't give up those 2 to 3 big plays in a game, they're winning games they're going to beat teams in this conference by 2-3 touchdowns. I'll go on a limb and say that if they stop giving up big plays, and history says they will, and
I'm
they
going to the schedule. Okay.
and in the red zone they start converting, I don't know what's a good touchdown percentage in the red zone. 60%.
Yeah, that's what I was going to say. 60. Yep.
Okay, if they start converting 50% of the time for touchdowns, I think they're going to win a lot of games by 2 scores or more. I really do. And we've talked about the schedule. I think they could go up to Minnesota this weekend. And I said earlier, I haven't given a score prediction. I could see them winning 27-6. I could.
I told you this week 24-10. I could see that. So it's roughly in the same ballpark. So here is where I am on the quarterback situation. So my plan has been wasted for the first 3 weeks. That was not, who knows if that was ever an option or crossed Kirk's mind, but he didn't go that route in regards to playing both quarterbacks, even though there is nothing on tape or statistically that tells us that Cade McNamara is a significantly better quarterback than Brendan Sullivan. Okay, here we are in game number 4. And to me, of course, if Cade goes out there and he's lousy, yank him. Gone. Like if this game is 6-3, regardless of who's winning at halftime, and Cade is 5 for 13, he's thrown a pick, he's got 34 yards passing, yank him. They won't yank him, I don't think.
I don't know.
I would yank him.
5-13 really bad. That's a really bad first half because he's been better in first halves. Well, he was better in the Iowa State first half. I guess he was better in the Illinois State second half. He's just hadn't put together 4 quarters of football, with the exception being Troy, and even then, I don't think he looked great. The eye test, he didn't pass the eye test for me against an inferior defense.
So this is my first of 3 scenarios. That's one. Cade's lousy, and the game is in doubt. Okay, yank him. Okay, we don't know what's going to happen after that, but I'm getting McNamara out at a halftime. Okay, scenario number 2. He's playing okay. He's playing okay through the first quarter and a half, whatever those stats are. 13 pass attempts. He's 8 for 13, but he's thrown a pick. And we got roughly the same result at halftime on the scoreboard. Then I'm moving Brendan Sullivan into the game. I'm working in Brendan Sullivan at that point because my quarterback is not getting the job done. He is not a winning quarterback. He's not a successful quarterback. The guy that's on the bench has been just as successful outside of the team that he's played for. That would be my remedy. Now, if Cade's got it working, of course, if he comes out 15 for 20 in the first half, not that he's going to throw that many passes, 15 or 20, and they're rolling and they win by a couple scores, of course, he's the starting quarterback and he has maintained his job. Otherwise, I don't get this allegiance to Cade McNamara.
They'll never take out a quarterback who A, is winning a game, and B, or I should say his team is winning a game, and B, his numbers are even average. He's never going to do that.
I mean, take him out. I say, do what should have been done in week 1. Move Brendan Sullivan into the lineup.
No.
Make it a quarterback competition.
It's more likely that would happen between games than it would ever happen during a game, I think. I mean, even back when Petrus struggled in 2021, you don't remember this, Mark, but he struggled. He was horrendous in 21. He was horrible. All right. And I'm not trying to be being Spencer Petrus. He was horrible. They go on the road and they play at Northwestern, won that game behind the arm of Alex Padilla. But remember what happened. Petrus comes in the first quarter of that game, looks awful, and they pull him. They put in Padilla, they win. What does Kirk say after the game? Well, Spencer was hurt. He's still nursing the arm. That's the only reason he got taken out. And I believe him. I actually believe him. I believe that was what it was. Regardless of his performance related or not, Kirk saw it as he's not playing well because of his arm. You know what I'm saying? It's not just purely a function of performance.
Sure. And his arm got remarkably better the next week.
Who did they play the next week?
I'm
No, I
just-
think they went with Padilla and they beat Illinois the next
Okay.
week at home. Jackson, thank you for the super chat. Tell your friends, your family, your frenemies, and the cashiers at Whole Foods about From the Hawkeye of the Storm and the voice of college football. Stay tuned. We've never heard that before. Usually he brings up, doesn't he normally bring up not Whole Foods? Doesn't he
Well,
bring
that's been a recent one out of Jackson. I've seen this one a few times. Or Publix.
See, it's usually Publix, and see, people
be
up in
Publix.
Iowa, people in Iowa don't have Publix. Erica, thank you for the super chat as well. I remember seeing or hearing from someone in the beat that Reese can throw the ball, just saying, let's see some exotics. Well, that might have been me, Erica, because at Kids Day, I was filming Reese Dakin throwing the football on the field, and I posted it to Twitter, and I think that video did pretty well on Twitter. He can throw. I've seen him throw. He can throw better than Torrey did at that age or at that point in his career.
These two quarterbacks threw almost exactly the same number of passes in Big Ten play last year, and Cade McNamara completed 51% of his passes, and Brendan Sullivan 64% of his passes, with a better TD to pick ratio.
And you could argue less around them.
Yeah,
I mean, even though Iowa's receivers were not good last year, collectively, the Iowa team helped the cause
with the tight end. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'm just trying to
in the
team as a whole put less pressure on the quarterback because it's a better team, right? They went 10-2 with Deacon Hill. By the way, speaking of Deacon Hill, we don't need to go off on this cliff, but you and I were talking last night on the phone, Mark. The numbers from these former Iowa quarterbacks are incredible. They're incredible. I mean, and it's not me trying to make fun of anybody, but it's an indictment, and there needs to be content that is produced on these things, but hard to do that during the season. But if people have missed this, let me read you some of these stats so far. Let's see. We'll start with Joe Labus last week. Who did Central Michigan lose to last week, Mark?
Illinois, right? Or was that Western Michigan?
I'm sorry, week before that. Who did Central Michigan lose to? If you know this, that's going to be wild. No, I don't know who they lost to the week. Was it? No, it wasn't Fresno. Whoever they played at G5, it was not a Power 5 team. Okay. Joe Labus against some power. Let me see if I have it. No, I don't. But anyways, had 5 interceptions. He was 20 of 39, 2 touchdowns, 5 interceptions, $151, 3.9 yards per attempt through the air for Joe Labus, and he gets pulled. His QBR was 5.6. That was 2 weekends ago. This past weekend, Labus went 20 of 39 for $151. I'm sorry, that's the same number. No, this past weekend he was 12 of 25, under 50% passing, 125 yards, 5 yards per attempt, no touchdowns, 1 interception, a QBR of 29.3. How about Deacon Hill this past weekend? He was the starter week 1 for the former Dixie State Aggies or whatever they are, Utah Tech. He went 3 of 6 this past weekend. I'm assuming he got pulled or he got hurt, one of the two. 3 of 6 for 23 yards, 3.8 yards per attempt. And by the way, Deuce Hogan, according to a source here, Deuce Hogan out for the rest of the season with a broken collarbone. But when he was playing this past weekend against Fresno State, who beat him by like 40, Deuce Hogan went 4 of 13 for 8 yards, 0.6 yards per attempt, no touchdowns, 2 interceptions, a QBR of 3.4. I mean, I'm not trying to laugh. It's just they are laughable numbers because these are guys that were at a Power 5 school that Iowa fans wanted to see in games. I mean, what does that tell you about recruitment of quarterbacks under the watch of Brian Ferentz and development of quarterbacks under the watch of Brian Ferentz? Because some of these guys, like Alex Padilla, who never sniffed the field at SMU, had an offer from Georgia. Deuce Hogan had an offer from he had a couple of Power 5 offers in there. I think Deacon Hill had a UCLA offer. He was at Wisconsin prior to coming to Iowa. So it's not like these guys didn't get other attention, but either Iowa's just targeting all the wrong guys, or it's a combination of that. Plus, they've had no idea how to develop these guys. Those are mind-boggling numbers, Mark.
They absolutely are. And you would think that a guy who was able to get playing time at Iowa, now none of those guys legitimately earned the starting job. But of course, Deacon Hill became the starter because of injuries, but still leaves the number 2 guy at Iowa. You would think the drop down in competition that they would just flourish.
Exactly. Exactly. One would think. By the way, Carson May, he's the other one we haven't mentioned. He has been at Wyoming, Coffeyville Community College. He's now at Abilene Christian. Has not seen a snap anywhere, I don't think. Erica, thank you for the super chat. I remember hearing from someone on the beat that Reese can throw. I already read that. Thank you for the super chat, Erica. Do appreciate that. And Jackson says that when Mark's on a different show, it's like seeing your favorite teacher at the grocery store, or it's like seeing Joe Rogan on a different podcast. You don't expect either thing to happen, but you have a great time.
Thank you, Jackson.
Big Bolivar says Corey seems very negative this season. He must have joined after the Brian Ferentz firing. Because he didn't know what negative is. Frank Adamo, thank you for being a premium member, Frank. At what point do you pull Cade? If he does get pulled, is it season over for him? Well, Mark, I think, answered that first question with his own take on the situation, but I don't think anything should be an end-all, be-all. If Brendan is struggling and Cade starts playing better during practice, this is a fluid situation like it is at any position. It should not be evaluated differently than you evaluate DB. Xavier Wampa had a bad play, a really bad play against Iowa State where he gave up a 75-yard touchdown pass. He got pulled. And yet Iowa quarterbacks can basically do whatever they want and they don't get pulled. It's a double standard, but it's been going on for years. Doug, I'll give this one to you, Mark. Will Caleb Johnson have a good game against Minnesota? What does Minnesota's rushing defense look like?
Well, the rushing defense has been phenomenal the last 2 weekends, but of course, you got to take the competition into consideration. Now, I got to think that Caleb Johnson, the way he's playing, the way the offensive line is playing, is going to be one of the more difficult tasks that Minnesota is going to face this entire season. If Caleb Johnson and this offensive line continue to perform as they did, and of course, I put the most validity in the Iowa State performance, then we are talking about one of the 4 best rushing attacks in the conference. And I will say that Omarion Hampton, the North Carolina running back, is arguably the best running back in the nation. He's going to be a pro and a guy that plays significant time on Sundays. And I think, I don't know, remember his numbers. They weren't eye-popping, just running over Minnesota, but he had a productive game. I think he ran for 115 to 120, something in that range, with a decent yards per carry. And of course, Minnesota shut down the pass, and North Carolina lost its starter, Max Johnson, sometime in the third quarter, something in that range. And so the threat of the pass was gone. And so Minnesota's not got a great rush defense, but they're certainly capable.
How about this, Mark? Iowa men's basketball recently got a commitment out of the cousin of rapper Juice WRLD. Have you ever heard of Juice WRLD, Mark?
Can't say that I have.
It's legitimate. No, Navon Shabazz, who is from Iowa, and I've not published a video yet. By the way, Chase, I was going to get to your call. He just hopped off. I guess Chase is one of our guys. I think that. Well, no, it's not. He's not working out in the fields right now. It's late, and we got some storms rolling through Iowa today, Mark. Some pretty strong. So we haven't had rain here in a long time, so we need the rain.
Well, I'll remind you, Corey, that if since you brought up some other sports there, that if you ever need anyone to come in here and defend Caitlin Clark, I'm your guy.
People, I'm glad you brought that up because
I'm being serious.
I know you are, and people will be happy to know that I did speak with Kasheen Alexander, and we are scheduling a recording session over the next couple of days regarding the Caitlin Clark controversy, the latest of the Caitlin Clark controversy. And I will be watching the playoffs as much as I can because I think they've got one regular season game left. It was either tonight or it's tomorrow. And the Fever are going to be in the playoffs. So I know Iowa fans will be all over those games. Okay, there was a question here from Jay. What are the chances Johnson stays healthy running 30 times a day during Big Ten play.
That's a bit much to ask.
Well,
30
he's not
times.
running. He's not running. I'd like to see what
Yeah.
his. They're so deep. I think
exactly.
Liddell Betts alluded to this. In fact, he didn't allude to it. He stated it pretty much verbatim last week during his press conference that he's getting a lot of carries right now, and he is their bell cow. But he said, there's a caveat to this. It's still early in the season, and we'll see once he starts, he's going to wear down. I mean, it's just you can't. There's nobody that's going to be carrying the ball 30 times a game at any level, especially in college. He's not doing that here. So let me give you an idea. Recent
He's
games.
in the low 20s.
Yeah, so
he carries.
He carried it 25. So he's only played 2 full games, right? He played 1 half against Illinois State. He carried the ball 25 times against Iowa State, 23 against Troy. There's a big, once you hit 25, there's a big difference between 25 and 30. At least that's what history would say at not just the college level, but the pro level as well. All right, Chase, we've got Chase on hold. The final little clip I want to show before we add Chase to the conversation here is I won't get demonetized if I show this, right? If I can show a little clip from Big Ten Network a couple of years ago. I'm going to do it. I'm going to do it anyways. And if I get demonetized, you know what? Whatever. I guess we'll know for the future, Mark. Here is the I'm not going to play the audio, so maybe that will help. 2017, was this 2017? So 2018. So first of all, just you can see this, right? I guess we can get our pictures. Let me get our pictures out of here. So here's the play for people that don't remember it. What stands out when you see this initially, Mark?
Well, Minnesota looks confused, and obviously the center is by himself.
All right, so let's.
And who's directly behind? Is that Petrus?
No, remember, that's the long snapper. That's not the center. It's the long snapper because this is a field goal. This guy here in the middle, 91, is Miguel Racinos. 97 is Colton Rastetter, the punter. And over here on the left, that is 39, the tight end, whose name escapes me. Boy, I don't remember him. He's a good blocking tight end. And then you see over here 94, and you're going to see Hawkinson over there. But watch this play as it transpires. This is, you can see the level of confusion for Minnesota, but this is just so un-Iowa. And then what do they do? And keep in mind, look at the score. It's a close game, Mark. This is not like they're running the score up. They're up 14-7, and it's 4th and goal in the second quarter at the 4. And then what do they do here? That's the strangest thing I'd ever seen in my life.
Can I see that play again? I want to see the snap. And look at Kirk. He's
all right. Watch the snap. You have, I believe it's Jackson Subert or whatever his name is. He's a left-handed long snapper, so he's able to do this. Watch this.
Okay. Yeah. Yeah, you're risking quite a bit there. And for Kirk, a 2-score lead to risk not going up by 2 scores.
I don't think people realize how nuts that is. For Kirk. I mean, it's a great play regardless of who it is. But this is a nuts thing to do for Kirk Ferentz and his MO.
Yeah.
One more time here on the replay. It's just the strangest thing. So anyways, let's add Chase into the mix here. I just wanted to share that because.
And by the way, what happened the rest of the game? What was the final score?
They won. I think they won comfortably. That was the game that Riley Moss, I believe, was a freshman, got picked on early, but then got a pick late, I believe. Yeah, I believe that was the year that it was Moss and Julius Brents, a couple of freshmen that were manning the two.
You said 2018, right?
2018, yep. You got a score?
No, I only have the last 5 years right here.
38-24. That's my guess.
Oh, okay.
38-24. Let's see if I'm right. 2018 was 48-31.
Wow.
48.
What happened to those games?
Oh my goodness. All right, let's add Chase into the mix here. Chase, welcome to the show.
How are you guys?
Hey,
Good.
Chase.
How are you doing?
Good. Am I allowed to do a player-by-player pick 'em with you guys? Iowa players versus Minnesota. I feel like that'd be fun, right?
Sure. Okay.
I'm gonna start quarterback.
Mark might be better at that than I am.
I made a cheat sheet.
Okay.
I wrote this all out. Cade versus Max Brosmer. I got yardage if you want it. I got 526 for Cade and 627 for Max. Max had 3 touchdowns.
Brosmer.
I'm going to take Brosmer too, but not by much.
Okay. Running backs. Caleb Johnson, 479 yards, 6 touchdowns. And then Darius Taylor, 25 carries, 188 yards, 3 touchdowns.
Caleb Johnson.
Again, slightly. Yeah. Caleb.
Okay.
It's a historically good rushing attack under PJ. So
Oh, yes.
got to give that line credit as well.
All right. Wide receiver, Jacob Gill and Daniel Jackson.
That's a tough one.
Yeah, it is a tough one. Going into the season, I would have taken Jackson in a heartbeat, but I was actually listening to our buddy Daniel House and their 247 Sports Minnesota podcast before I came on here, and they were talking about Daniel Jackson making some boneheaded plays last week, apparently.
I'll take hey, based on that, I'll take Jacob Gill because he has not had a single drop this year. He's been Mr. Reliable. So I'll take Jacob Gill, but that's almost a wash.
Yeah.
Okay. Elijah Spencer and Reese Vanderzee.
I don't know anything about who Elijah Spencer is.
Yeah. I don't know much about him. I know the name. He
has done nothing since week 1.
Yeah, well, I'm still picking Reese. I don't know the other guy either.
No.
Okay. Tight end, Luke Lachey or Jameson Gears. That should be easy.
Yeah, sure. Lachey.
Although last year it would have been closer, right? Because wasn't Spansford still there?
Spansford.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, we'll do corners next. Jane Joyner, is that right? I can't even do my own handwriting. And then Jamari Harris.
So go ahead, Corey.
These are the hard ones. Jamari Harris hasn't given up anything this year. He's had a couple of picks, had a pick 6 last week. But I don't. Sounds like that's a really good DB room for Minnesota as well, Mark.
Yeah, it is. But
individuals.
This is where it confounds me that it's a 2.5 point spread. And I'm not saying that Vegas is wrong and that I was not going to just squeak by and win 19-16, but they should. They are a decidedly better team, because if you look at position by position on offense, they are either slightly better or right in the ballpark with Minnesota across the board. We just went through the skill positions, and you could carry that out to wide receiver. Minnesota does not have a really good wide receiver room either.
And the strength of the offense right now, Mark, appears to be the offensive line for Iowa.
Yes, and Minnesota's had better offensive lines in the past. They've had excellent offensive lines. This one, they've got a potential first rounder at left tackle in Arante Ursary. But besides him, the offensive line's not supposed to be anything special. And then the entire Iowa defense is decidedly, again, better than Minnesota. Minnesota's got a good defense, but they have one of the 30 or 40 best defenses in the country. And Iowa's got one of the 5 best.
Okay, let's go do safeties. I don't know if it's Bryson Coleman.
I don't even know the names of the guys, but I'm taking Minnesota safeties.
And then Xavier Wampa.
Yeah, I'm just taking the unit. I'll take the Minnesota unit because, first of all, their numbers are really good through 3 weeks, and they've also produced really good NFL players at safety. Not that Iowa hasn't, but Xavier's been pulled, And I don't even know is Xavier who's going to get more snaps, Xavier or entering. Or I don't even know that Xavier is the starter right now.
Gotcha. He was the first one to come up on stats.
Yeah, I mean he should be the starter. He's a former 5-star, but he's not been playing like it. So
All right, you guys will know this one. Maverick or linebacker Maverick Bromkowski. I don't know his name, and then Jay Higg.
Yeah.
Pretty
This
easy.
entire linebacking core, it's arguably the best in the country.
Yeah.
And Minnesota's is good. This Cody Lindenberg's a good player. But yeah, this is not comparable.
Gotcha. And then the punters. You guys know anything about the Minnesota punter?
No.
I know they're good in the kicking game. I don't know much about their punter. I know their kicker. Didn't he kick a 55-yarder last week and made one? He's an experienced guy, probably one of the better kickers in the conference. Although, didn't he miss one at the end of the North Carolina game, Mark?
Their punter, yes. He missed Kesich was 23 of 27 last year.
Yeah.
But he missed that one at the gun. Now their punter's back, Mark Crawford, and he was his numbers are good, 42.5. But
that's great.
No, it's not exceptional, but
I'll take Iowa because I think it sounds like maybe punters are a wash, and I like Drew Stevens.
Drew Stevens seems like he's kicking the heck out of the ball. Like you said, through the uprights, it's clear at the top each time, no matter where it is.
Telling you, he should have kicked that 66-yarder against Iowa.
Yes, you're the first person I heard say that, and I'm so happy. I'm so happy you just said that.
Yes,
I was screaming at the TV saying, "Kick the field goal, just try."
He was, as Don Patterson said, they were going into the wind. There was a slight wind, but he made one. I believe it sounded like he made one in pregame that would have been good from around 70. Now it's different in real game action, and but again, what would you rather? Would you rather have Cade throw the ball 10 yards short on a Hail Mary, 10 yards short of the end zone, or would you rather put it on Drew Stevens' leg to win the game, not just tie the game, to win the game?
It's a lot easier to be mad at Cade than it is at the kicker. That's all.
Nobody's going to be mad at the kicker for missing.
Exactly. That's why I said it. I was screaming at TV, just say, kick the ball, please. Just try. What are you out?
It was a good return by Max White. They had that 1 second on the clock, and I thought maybe they'd get a field goal. But
I'm going to take one last stab at the kicking department here because Drew Stevens, 18 of 26 last year, long of 53.
Struggled a little bit as the season went on, but he's had a really good offseason, Mark.
The Minnesota kicker, Dragan Kesich, was first team All Big Ten.
I know.
23 of 27, hit from 54, 3 of 4 plus 50. That was last year.
I think Drew is in line to have a top 3 in the conference type of season. Yeah, it'd be very easy. I led with that their Minnesota's kicker is really good and really experienced, but I like Drew Stevens a lot, and I think Dakin is, if he can carry over what he did second half last week, he should probably have the nod at punting. And I was going to say real quick, LeVar got some things to clean up too. Kirk was very critical of the punt coverage during his press conference Tuesday. He said he'd never seen anything like it. he said all the players were on one half of the field. He said I'd never seen anything like it.
I heard that. Yeah.
So that's a little bird. That's a little worm for LeVar Woods' ear that, hey, this better get fixed. And it should be. It'll be fixed.
We're a kick away from both teams from being 3-0 versus 3-0. Iowa just outside of the top 10 probably. And Minnesota might be ranked at this point.
True.
How do you look at the Iowa State game? Was it just you guys supposed to look at it as a fluke deal? Like I watched it back again, and I don't even know what happened. Like it just went so south so fast.
I don't really look at it as a fluke so much as as I said after, it was bad game management, and when you continue to make poor decisions at big moments in games, you're as much as your team does all the little things right, little couple of things that your team didn't do right, like giving up a couple of big pass plays, stupid pass by Cade McNamara, and all of a sudden you're a couple of mismanaged plays away and mismanaged decisions away from blowing a game. It still required a 54-yard field goal, Chase. Think about that.
No kidding. Yeah, I know. It was sad to see. You know how much excitement I had when they they kicked it off and he ran it back for like 22 yards. Like, holy smokes! 1 sec, we have a chance here, but
Yeah.
that chance went up in smoke. All right, 3 more. O line and D line's probably both going to go to Iowa, right? Pretty
I don't know
easily.
much about the Minnesota D line. That might be an interesting conversation. Again, based on the numbers, I don't know much about the unit. I just know their run numbers have been very good. What can you tell us about the defensive line, Mark? You're no Daniel House, but what
No, I'm
insight?
not. I've not studied this team. I've not. I watched a little of the North Carolina game, but
I will take Iowa. I mean, just because the defensive line looked really good last week. The edge pressure they got from Herkett, from Llewellyn, from Brian Allen was exceptional. And if they can bring all that together and get what they got from the interior guys, from Aaron Graves at the 3 sack day week 1, they could be dominant. Mark, remember preseason when I told you it was odd that your guy, who's the guy does the college football book preseason,
Steele,
that he had Iowa as like his number 1 defensive line in the conference or something. So maybe it wasn't number 1, but it was really high.
Yeah, it was high.
And I thought that was odd. But if it all comes together, and this is something that's newsworthy, and I tweeted something out about it, Chase, but we got to talk with Jay Neiman, defensive line assistant coach, this week on Wednesday, and he did say that Jeff Bowie, who has been dealing with injuries throughout his career, is finally back full speed, and he did say that during camp, he thought Bowie was in a position to really help them. So it sounds like they want to get him rotated in. If they can get another body on the inside to kind of give guys like Graves, guys like, well, it's really Graves and Y right now, especially if Brian Allen's running primarily on the outside. Jeremiah Pittman's running a little bit to help the interior. If they get that 4th guy, that'd be big. So we'll see if that happens this week with Bowie.
To start the season, Phil Steele ranked Iowa's offensive line number 41 in the country and Minnesota 24.
Offensive line?
Offensive line.
Well,
defensive line.
Where was Iowa on that one? They were high.
Defensive line. Iowa 5, number 5 in the country.
Incredible. That's an incredible preseason prediction. I mean, just for a D line that lost quite a bit with Joe Evans leaving and Logan Lee and Noah Shannon, even though he didn't play last year, he was supposed to.
Why don't we bring more pressure on defense? Like, I just feel like Iowa is one of the 1 teams that doesn't do a lot of blitz. Is it to try to exterminate the deep ball? Because, I mean, that hasn't really been working. But I feel like when we bring pressure, good things usually happen.
Yeah, but it's because it's timed very, very well and very deliberately, Chase.
Gotcha.
Phil wants to keep everything. I mean, Kirk talked about that on Tuesday. What's made this defense great is they keep everything in front of them. And it's not that an offense can't pick you apart like Penn State did last year, but it's very difficult to do. When you're disciplined, you're solid in run fits, you've got guys who are adequate, capable tacklers, reliable tacklers, especially on the outside. You're not going to put your guys on an island unnecessarily very often. But when he does do it, like you said, it's typically successful.
Right.
Was it the game 2 years ago in Minnesota that was that about the worst rush defense game in recent years under Phil Parker? Because Minnesota just took it to him.
I think they had 2 years of that, didn't they?
Like 270 yards rushing.
But they lost.
Okay.
Minnesota lost that game.
Well, they fumbled in the red zone near the end of the game.
Sort of like how Iowa lost to Iowa State a couple weeks ago. In a sense.
Yeah.
They didn't bust out. Now they got there differently. They were just moving the chains. But that's kind of the Kirk way. I mean, you don't want to give up that many yards, but I go back to 2017. Remember all the yards they gave up to Saquon Barkley in Kinnick, and they lost in the final play. Well, that guy had like 250 all-purpose yards in that game.
Okay, Marcus Major and Kamari Moulton.
I would have told you a few weeks ago Marcus Major for sure, but now Corey has sold me on Kamari Moulton.
Well, I don't know if Kamari Moulton's going to play because it sounds like he was in concussion protocol after the game Saturday. But if he plays,
Marcus Major was a big-time recruit at Oklahoma and played pretty well with the Sooners. Wasn't a star, but he played well.
Wasn't that funny? There was a Marcus Major at Oklahoma, and wasn't there a Major Booty at Oklahoma as well?
Yes.
Or no, that was
General.
Booty. General. He wasn't. He hadn't gone up to Major yet.
Yeah, he had not been demoted to Major.
Oh, I'm sorry. I got it flipped around there. I apologize.
Much better than Major. Yes.
Any word on Seth Anderson? I don't know if Kirk might have said something Tuesday, but I wasn't. I
He
didn't
may have
watch it.
said something Wednesday. He said nothing about it. It was not asked.
Okay.
Can I just say real quick? We get a rotating schedule of assistant coaches every Wednesday. We've had Liddell, we've had Jay Neiman, we got Abdul Hodge. So that means we still haven't gotten Kelvin Bell. We've not gotten John Budmeyer. We've not gotten who am I missing here? We're going to get all the coordinators are available during the bye week. But anyway, my point is there's a chance we get Budmeyer next week, and if we do, that'll be asked most definitely.
Okay, and then another thing, Corey, how in the world do you get yourself into a job like this? Like, how do you
job like this?
Yeah, well, you do media and stuff for Iowa. Like, how did you get to where you are? I'm just
that's
an odd question.
Tell us, Corey.
What's that?
Tell us, Corey. How'd you pull this off?
Have you ever been asked that? Like, how did you get to where? Like, how did you get to do this? I don't know. It might be an odd question. If you don't want to answer it, you don't have to. But
it's not an odd question. I just don't know how to answer it because I've never been asked that question on the air before. Well, I'll give credit to Mark to some extent because my background before, I out of school, Chase, I worked AM/FM news and sports radio for a time. So that's kind of the broadcasting background. And then was out of it completely. But I podcasted growing up all the time. Always talked about Iowa sports. Like even when I was like 14 years old, I had a podcast. It's called Bradis Branded Thoughts. So I haven't changed the name all these years for that reason. But I mean, I've just always done that. And so you get more and more comfortable with it. And then in 2020, when the world was shut down and you got more time in your hands, I was like, well, I don't know where I got the inspiration to kind of, I think really what it started. I don't think I had a vision to do a post-game show and to have all these coaches and all this interaction, a live call-in show, but I had seen Mark's content and I was never somebody that interacted on YouTube or social media with people like that. But I watched it. I watched Mark's content, never commented on a video. That's just was never my style. And then I think one day I did reach out to Mark and said, hey, you don't have any Iowa content. Would you like to record something? And he said yes. And so that was my first time in front of the screen, I guess, for this platform.
And by the way, Corey,
it was horrible.
What's that?
I said I remember my first time on this show. I was terrified.
Oh,
camera shy.
And by the way, Corey, I did not say, why don't you tell us, because I was expecting any kind of credit. That wasn't my incentive, but thank you for that. But it was more or less knowing that you have a news background, how you transitioned or added because you still are in news.
Yeah, I remember having a couple of conversations over the phone with you several years back about the vision to have a post-game show, after we had recorded some stuff together. But that was your inspiration, honestly, because I had visions when I was working AM/FM radio of being able to build a brand to where, hey, why can't we do here's the thing, Chase. Where in Iowa do you live?
Southeast Iowa.
Okay, so I won't name specifics, but there are local radio stations that have post-game shows after the game. There are a couple that I knew of, at least up until a few years ago. Of course, I don't listen to those now, but there's a lot of Learfield affiliates, so a lot of radio stations that don't have post-game shows.
I think here it's like 96.1 or something that Gary Dolphin's on, or 96.5 or something like that.
But I'm guessing they don't have a post-game show. Like they have the Gary Dolphin post-game show, but after that, they go back to programming. There are a couple of Learfield affiliates that have long call-in style post-game shows that are very well known. The reason I bring that up is there are so many Learfield affiliates, and I happen to work for one of them way back when. And so the natural thought for me was, why can't we do that here? Why can't we do that here and market it locally? But this is so much beyond that because you're able to broadcast to people everywhere, and you're not limited by a radio tower that stretches maybe across 2 counties. It's just a totally different animal. But it's great. It's been organic. It's a learning process.
It's fun that you can interact with people too, like someone like me that just wants to come on and talk Iowa football. That's the best part about it, I think.
Absolutely.
Really, I mean, for
100%. And that's and Coach Patterson would say the same thing. What's drawn him to the show over the years has always been the fact that we've had callers, people that comment from Africa and from Alaska and from South America. And he just thinks I think it's cool too. It's really an amazing thing. So, but credit to Coach. I guess I said give credit to Mark, but also Coach Patterson, being able to have the rapport with Coach Patterson. He's been the backbone of the postgame show. This show would be nothing without people like Coach Patterson, Coach Gary Close, Kasheen Alexander. Those people make this show. If you look at my bio on Twitter, the bio is Iowa postgames with Coach Patterson, Coach Close, and Kasheen Alexander, because that's what, to me, that's the best part of doing this, being able to have experts like former coaches, former players.
All right. Yeah, no, it's just crazy. And I just want to know because it feels like every time you're just people that actually get on and don't come from a radio background or something. Like it takes a pair of cojones to get on here and just talk in front of people. Like I don't think I'd ever be able to do it. But
Well,
I mean, here I'm doing it now, but it took a lot of reminiscing at first to actually click the button. So
I went through the same thing to some extent. So.
But anyways, well, thanks for talking to me tonight,
absolutely.
guys. And
appreciate your call, sir. It's always a pleasure. We'll talk to you after the Saturday.
Yep. Thanks, see you guys.
All right, Mark. I've taken you longer than I told you I would, but I do want to get to one final thing before we sign off for the day, and that is you made a pretty big announcement on social media earlier today regarding a project that I'd like to know more about. I'd like to know how long this has been in the works, but if anybody missed it, here is the post from the official Voice of College Football social media network earlier today. So, Mark, tell us a little bit about this project, this book that will be dropping here next month, and how long has this been in the works, and what can people expect?
So, anybody who's listened to my show for any period of time, especially in the off season, knows that I have certain issues with the way college football has been conducted through the ages. And one is the selection of national champions. And I've often questioned it. And so the 1990s is the decade in which was the most transcendent in regards to how the national polls and the structure of determining a champion moved from just the polls to the Bowl Coalition to the BCS era, which of course paved the way for the playoff era. So basically what this book is, it's a season by season analysis of the 1990s, and it gives storylines and narratives to the seasons and the players and the teams that made runs for the national championship. But then also it more or less breaks down the scenarios of how these teams or the matchups were determined, how the scenarios played out, and then were those determinations of a champion, which was entirely the AP and the coaches poll from 1990 or going all the way back to 1936 through 97, were those results justified? Were they accurate? Was anyone left out that had a resume that was just as qualified to play for a national championship or be selected as the national champion? Then I didn't want to make this just a history book. So I took all of those seasons and I played them out under the future models, meaning the BCS era. How would that same season have worked through the BCS era? And the movement of teams from conference to conference, going to different conferences, how would that same season, let's just take 1993, for example, how would that have played out during the 4-team playoff? And then now that we're going forward with a 12-team playoff, which is a good thing that was proposed and put into play while I was in the process of writing this book, because I thought, okay, well, now It's going to make it more fresh to now apply all of these seasons to a 12-team playoff. And how would that have played out? Who would have been selected? And now, because it's on the table for a 14-team playoff, also included those scenarios. And then pretty much an aftermath to each season to say, where did these teams that played into this championship run, where did they go from here? Where did the programs go? Where did the coaches go? What was the trajectory going forward? How did this championship season, championship run, and all these games impact the sport going forward? So it was a lot of fun.
I am curious. Chase just asked about getting into this type of broadcasting role. I mean, what inspired you to? I mean, you kind of talked about your inspiration to some extent, but I mean, the book side of it is unique. You've never written a book before.
No. I wrote a term paper. I'll call it a term paper. I was in high school, early in high school at the time. But, you're talking to somebody, and this doesn't surprise you, Corey, who wrote like a 10,000-page essay in 1984 on why college football should have a playoff. So, what was that? That was what? That was 20 years before. That was 30 years before there was a playoff. That I'm writing an essay in school to say college football should have a playoff, and this is why. And I'm writing 10,000 words on it. So it's something that I've thought about quite a bit, and I always love the scenarios and the breakdowns of the teams and evaluating the teams and all of that. And so I've always been fascinated, because one of the fascinations of college football, I think, for a lot of fans is that there had always been a mystery as to how did these teams get selected. So Corey, even though you didn't really live during this time, that you would watch all the big New Year's Day bowl games, and there would be some years where you could determine, okay, well, the number one team won. They won decidedly. So they're the national champion. But to officially find out, you had to wait till the paper arrived the next morning. And if there was some kind of crazy number 3 beat number 1, but number 2 beat number 7, and they were more impressive, you'd go to bed on New Year's night and you had no idea who won the national championship. And it was this big drama. Who are they going to vote for? Who's going to be the national champion? And you'd have to get the paper the next day. Oh, okay, Nebraska is the national champion. Wow. It was a close vote. And so I just always found that to be intriguing. So yeah, I've always been a better writer than a broadcaster. Not that I get much practice writing, so I'm not selling this in any such way as any kind of Pulitzer Prize effort here. What was the most difficult thing is just working through all the scenarios. I would have to think and rethink it and make sure that I wasn't missing something, because there were several drafts, and the biggest issue was not the writing of it. It was I missed that. That's right. Nebraska would have played them, and therefore that's going to change that. And working through the scenarios to make sure that they were airtight and made sense was probably the biggest challenge. Now, I had no idea all that there is that goes into actually formulating the book. The writing of it wasn't the obstacles involved. It was more or less just the cover design, the formatting, and now it's going to be the marketing.
So I'm curious, this might be the most important question. How do people get their hands on it?
So
October 29th?
It's going to be officially released on October 29th, and we will have links all over the place. But basically, just go to Amazon and look it up. Disputed National Champions should be right there. But we will certainly make it as well known as possible and available for everyone.
Great stuff. This is interesting. This is it's funny how things happen at the same time, because we've been over on the Iowa, from the Hawkeye the Storm channel, this channel, throughout this football season so far. Big Hawkeye fan, Steph Kramer, who went to Iowa, grew up on the farmlands of Iowa. She is promoting her book on the post-game show. And I love being able to read a book that has a background with someone, or I should say from someone that I have common ground with. So I'm going to be fascinated to learn about the 90s and some of these debates that I know you've had with people on your show that I can't totally relate to, but I know someone else who's going to look forward to reading this, and that's Coach Don Patterson. I guarantee you Coach Patterson will get himself a copy, Mark.
Well, I would be honored if he would take the time to read it. It's a quick read, should be a quick read. You know, it's not just volumes and volumes. It's not some kind of novel. It's like 100 pages. There's a lot of lists and so forth, because that's what college football is, a lot of lists and rankings and a lot of scenarios. Yeah.
Great stuff. Well, congratulations on that, Mark. And
Thank you.
We'll count down the days to that release, and I'm sure we'll have more opportunities to talk about it over on the Iowa channel. And how many different channels do you have now?
Well, technically, I don't want to tell you technically, because a lot of are undercover at this point. But oh my goodness, there's about 28.
28.
Okay. There's about 15 to 18 that are fully functioning to some degree.
That last question about how you found time to write a book is a fair one. But well, Mark, I appreciate you being here for the last hour and a half. And you got a big weekend in front of you. It's a fun Friday night gauntlet of games. Besides Illinois and Nebraska, are there any games that stand out on Friday to you?
Kyle McCord, who's off to a great start, the former Ohio State quarterback, has a Syracuse team that is 2-0, 3-0 at the time, with already a conference win over Georgia Tech, and they got Stanford, so they could go to 2-0 on Friday night.
And how about we watch some CW? CW football between San Jose State and Wazoo.
And speaking of playoff implications, think about this. Washington State just knocked off what could be a decent Washington team. We'll see. And now they go into this quasi Mountain West Conference schedule that is kind of strange, that Oregon State and Washington State play this strange, like almost Notre Dame-esque in the ACC, like 6 or 7 games against the Mountain West. And if you look at Washington State's schedule, you look at it and think, could they go undefeated? And it's not a joke of a schedule, but it's not a Big Ten schedule.
So real quick, what happens? They're counted they'd be considered a G.
They're an at-large. They would have to. They're not in a conference. Their conference. The Pac-12 still exists with Washington State and Oregon State, but there's only 2 teams. So the conference champion, there is no conference champion really, although they're playing each other. So technically, I guess there would be, but the conference does not get an auto bid. So they are being treated as an at-large team, like in the Power 5.
Yeah, but I thought, okay, the reason I bring it up, the highest ranked non-Power 4 team gets in, correct?
I'd have to go through that. Whether that's
so, would Wazoo qualify? Is my question.
But no, they're still considered a power conference team.
No, there's no way they can be, because they can't win their conference. Just like I'm guessing Army or any of those independents, Notre Dame, if they're the high, well, no, how would that work? Notre Dame,
they're an at-large. They have to be selected. So would Washington State. They have to be an at-large that is selected.
So what is the criteria then for that automatic non-Power 4? So is it G5? Are they calling it the highest ranked G5 school?
Yes.
So technically, independent schools, along with Wazoo and Oregon State, are not part of the G5. That's unfair to Oregon State and Wazoo. I almost feel like they ought to be. They're playing the G5. It's not their decision to be independent. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
It's these other schools' decisions to be independent. Why shouldn't they be able to?
Yeah, they are going to play most likely the winner of the Mountain West. They're both playing Boise State. They're playing some of the best teams in the Mountain West. If they just run over them and go undefeated, you would think, well, they should be given that spot.
But then everybody would want to be in that position. Like all the Power 5 schools now would be like, wow, I'd rather play that schedule.
Yeah.
So, yeah. Interesting. So they're kind of being treated as an independent. Okay.
But they could get to 4-0 on Friday night.
Yeah. And then, of course, Saturday, a number of big games, including big noon kickoff between Marshall and Ohio State. Mark, you and I talked about that. So that's kind of an interesting big noon game. But NC State Clemson, I'm intrigued by Charlotte, Indiana, because I every game now from here on out, I'm curious to see how many games Indiana continues to win. That's not a great Charlotte team. It's a decent Charlotte team defensively. They've played a couple of good teams. They played North Carolina, played James Madison. Speaking of James Madison, they're undefeated. They play North Carolina this week. You get, let's see, Iowa State will play Arkansas State. You've got Michigan USC. You've got Georgia and who?
Georgia. I don't think they play.
They're off this week.
Yeah, not this week.
Okay.
The
Miami
big games in the SEC. You get Tennessee, Oklahoma,
Tennessee,
Auburn,
Oklahoma,
Arkansas, but Tennessee, Oklahoma is the big game in the SEC.
But as far as the nightcap is concerned, it's probably down to either Michigan State, BC, Iowa, Minnesota, or, as you said, Tennessee, Oklahoma. Certainly the highest ranked game. So
Utah and Oklahoma State get together. That's a big game in the Big 12.
Between the old guys at quarterback.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you see that stat?
I've seen some stats floating around this week.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. 7 years older combined than two of the quarterbacks playing in one of the NFL games, Caleb Williams and Anthony Richardson.
Ridiculous. And isn't one of them eligible to come back next year? Like,
that would not be Alan Bowman. So, that's a good question. I
thought I read that somewhere, but maybe I'm wrong. Anyways,
Miami's got a 9th-year tight end playing.
9th year.
Yeah.
Ninth year. Think about that.
Yeah.
For a freshman, that's 9 years is half of their life. So
yeah,
far.
That's crazy.
All right, folks. Find Mark over at voice of. Tell us your Twitter handles now. I don't even know how to. You're the VOCFB is your main Voice of College Football channel, but your personal handle.
Mark Rogers, VOCFB. That's me. You don't know what you're going to get, though. I may be ranting about something, but the official account, if you want to just stick to college football, the VOCFB on X, Twitter.
Check out his stuff all weekend, all week, all year. And myself and Coach Don Patterson will be live on the air just minutes after the conclusion of Iowa, Minnesota, the battle for the pig up in Minneapolis from Huntington Bank Stadium. It's a 6:30 p.m. Central Time kick on the NBC network. And should be a good one under the lights. Mark, appreciate you taking the time. And we'll recap all of this. If I don't talk, I'll probably talk to you before then, but if I don't, we'll recap all of it on Iowa Hawkeyes Live next Tuesday over on Iowa Football at the Voice of College Football.
Thanks, Corey. It was fun.
Right. Folks, thank you for being here for the last 2.5 hours. We will talk to you Saturday after the big game.